6 years. That's how long I carried her dream on my back like a mule bred for loyalty and sacrifice. It wasn't always this heavy. At first, it felt like pride. Back when she'd hold my hand with ink-stained fingers after studying until midnight and whisper, "Thank you for believing in me, Marcus." I believed, all right. Believed so hard that I took double shifts, skipped vacations, said no to promotions that required me to relocate, and poured every bonus check into her tuition, her rent, her textbooks, and those endless essential fees that med school seemed to invent every other semester. When her student loan application got denied, I co-signed without hesitation. When her car broke down, I sold mine and took the bus. When she had breakdowns during finals, I stayed up with her, holding back the weight of her anxiety with a cracked joke and a warm meal. I wasn't just her husband. I was her cheerleader, her financier, her crisis intervention team, her human Xanax. I used to joke that I wasn't her partner, I was her sponsor. And we'd laugh, mostly because it was half true, and partly because it hurt to say out loud. But never, not once, did I say it with resentment. I loved her, and I believed in her. Until that morning. She was in the shower, humming some upbeat song, maybe something by SZA or Ari Lennox, whatever she played on her empowerment playlist. I was just passing by her desk to grab the charger when I noticed her laptop open, screen still bright. Her graduation speech draft sat front and center, the title bold and centered. To New Beginnings. Curious, proud even, I read on. To new beginnings, it started, and to the courage it takes to let go of the past. My fingers froze on the mousepad. My heart didn't quite beat the same after that sentence. I read it again. And to the courage it takes to let go of the past. Let go of the past? I wasn't the past. I was still very much standing in our house, paying our bills, reheating her leftovers, folding her laundry. I was the one who had just bought her a dress for her graduation dinner and booked the restaurant she had pinned on Instagram. What the hell did she mean by that? I scrolled down, hoping to find context, some line that redeemed me, some sentence that acknowledged the years I'd poured into her becoming the woman she now saw in the mirror. But there was nothing. Just mentions of her professors, her classmates, her mentors, her mother, and of course, Kayla, her ever-loyal best friend, who once told me I seemed too comfortable being average. No mention of me. Not even a thank you to the man who paid for every goddamn part of her journey from pre-med to the morning she'd put on that cap and gown. Not a word about the man who built her life while setting his own on fire. I just sat down in her desk chair, staring at the screen, hands folded in my lap like a man trying to stay calm at the edge of an earthquake. The cursor blinked at me like a taunt. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she just hadn't finished. Maybe I'd see a draft tomorrow that included me, called me her rock, or her constant. I almost laughed at how pathetic the hope sounded in my head. But that line, to let go of the past, kept echoing. It wasn't poetic. It was precise. It was a surgical strike buried in metaphors. And I was the target. When she walked out of the bathroom wrapped in steam, in that familiar terry cloth robe, she smiled at me and kissed my forehead. "You're up early." I nodded. "Yeah, just checking emails." "You didn't see the speech draft, did you?" I tilted my head. "I did." She paused, then said lightly, "Don't judge too hard. It's just a rough cut." Rough cut. That line was carved like marble. I didn't argue. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled and said, "Sounds like you're ready for what's next." She blinked for a second longer than usual, maybe wondering if I caught something. But she shrugged and walked off to start her makeup. That moment rewrote everything for me. I had been holding up a dream that no longer had a place for me in it. She had already rewritten her story, and I wasn't even a footnote. The 6 years I'd spent carrying her were already being packed away into the chapter labeled What I Outgrew. And the worst part? I wasn't even angry. I was numb. There's a silence that comes when your soul finally catches up with what your instincts have been whispering for months. I'd noticed the way she stopped laughing at my jokes, how she said, "my apartment," instead of "our place," how she introduced me less and less in public settings. I'd brushed it off as stress, but it wasn't stress. It was detachment dressed as ambition. And now, it was almost done. I closed her laptop gently. I didn't confront her. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even ask her to explain. Because in that moment, I realized something more important than any answer she could give. I had become invisible to the person I gave everything for. That morning, as she walked past me with her makeup perfect and her dreams already casting a shadow over mine. I made a quiet promise to myself. She thinks she's starting a new beginning. So will I. And mine won't come with a thank you note or a graduation cap. It'll come with something a little louder, a little colder, a little more permanent. She never left her phone unlocked. Not once in 6 years. It was something I joked about, the way she clutched it like it contained state secrets. If I so much as glanced at it while it buzzed on the table, she'd swoop in with a laugh that didn't quite touch her eyes. Privacy is healthy, she used to say. And I agreed. Until that morning. She left in a rush, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, purse half-zipped. She was late for some student panel on patient advocacy. I watched her go through the front window like I always did, sipping my own cup of stale, reheated caffeine. The door clicked shut. Then her phone buzzed on the couch. I glanced at it. Reflex, not suspicion. But the screen lit up with no lock. That never happened. Not even on accident. My first instinct was to call her, tell her she left it behind. But then the notification blinked again. Kayla. Of course. Girl, did you file yet? The clock is ticking. LOL. My stomach turned in a way I hadn't felt since my mother's funeral, something in between nausea and falling off a ledge. Another message came through before I could process the first. Photo's gonna look weird if you wait till after the ceremony. Don't want him all up in your graduation pics. Haha. I stared at the screen, as if disbelief could undo what I just read. Then came the dagger. He's still clueless, right? Gotta love how useful he's been, though. Let that ink dry, sis. Let that ink dry. It was like reading my own obituary in real time, sent via text and wrapped in emojis. I didn't scroll at first. I couldn't. I just sat there, phone in hand, heartbeat pounding against my ribs like a warning siren. The room went silent around me, except for the blood rushing to my ears. When I finally opened the thread, I saw months of messages, hidden in plain sight. Plans, laughs, complaints, strategy. Everything laid out in casual cruelty between two women who were supposed to love me, one as my wife, the other as a trusted friend. Marcus is like the perfect training wheel. Solid until you're ready to really ride. Med school was the goal, not the marriage. He's sweet, but he's not built for where I'm going. That one gutted me. Not because it was harsh, but because it was exactly how she'd started treating me in the last year. Like I was some relic of her old life. The man who paid for the classes, kept the fridge full, stayed up to quiz her with flashcards, but didn't belong in the polished version of her future. The Marcus she built with? That guy didn't make the cut. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just put the phone back where she left it, like some invisible crime scene I didn't want to disturb. I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by framed photos of us, ski trips, graduation dinners, our honeymoon in Tulum. And I realized none of it mattered anymore. All those smiles were temporary, staged for the camera, archived for the illusion. I was never her destination. I was the bridge she used to get there. But even in that storm of betrayal, I didn't break. Because what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had been building something too. While she studied her anatomy flashcards and vented about clinical rotations, I was up every night in the spare room coding like a man possessed. NovaSync wasn't just an idea, it was a living, breathing platform. A medical diagnostics AI that could detect anomalies faster than human specialists. I'd pitched it quietly, developed it under the radar, surrounded myself with a skeleton crew of remote engineers who signed strict NDAs. I told no one, not even her. She thought I was just tinkering with some side project, something to keep me busy while she built her empire. She used to call it cute when I stayed up late at my desk, blue light glasses on, scribbling flowcharts like a man lost in a dream. But that dream had teeth. And just last week, it bit. MedAxis, one of the fastest growing medtech corporations in the country, had acquired NovaSync in a quiet, under-the-table deal. $500 million. Closed. Locked. Executed. I'd insisted on a 1-week NDA before they made the announcement. My lawyer, Raymond, had found it strange. You don't want the buzz? The press? What's the point of going public if you're keeping quiet? I just shook my head and said, give me a week. I needed to be clean. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. Raymond had known me for a decade. He could tell when something personal was in the shadows. And this? This was personal. I wasn't just holding on to that information for drama. I was holding it like a sword, waiting for the right moment to pull it from its sheath. She thought she was timing everything perfectly. Wait until graduation. Smile for the cameras. File the paperwork. Walk away with the illusion of moral high ground. And, she assumed, half of whatever little I had left. But she didn't know that little had just become life-changing. She didn't know she was divorcing a half-billionaire. And because of the NDA, she wouldn't have any legal claim to it. The ink wouldn't be dry in time. I sat back down, staring at the wall like it held answers I hadn't yet found. My heart ached, not just from betrayal, but from the eerie calm settling over me. It was like grieving someone who was still alive, someone who kissed you goodbye that morning but buried you in her mind months ago. She had no idea what storm she had just walked into. But I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to rage. I was going to wait. And when the ink dried, just like she planned, I'd be there. Not as the broken husband she thought she left behind, but as the man she never saw coming. The strange thing about success is how quiet it can be when you want it to be. While she buried herself in hospital rotations and late-night study groups, I buried myself in code. Not just lines of code, but architecture, scalability, future-proofing. NovaSync wasn't built to be trendy. It was built to be vital. It started as an idea during one of her breakdowns. She'd come home from a clinical shift fuming about how long a patient waited for results. "It's archaic," she'd muttered. "We're doctors, not fortune tellers. We shouldn't be guessing off delays." She was venting, but my mind had already begun assembling pieces. I started researching AI applications and diagnostics that very night. 2 months later, I had a working prototype that could scan inputted vitals and symptom clusters to produce predictive analytics. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than the lag-riddled mess hospitals were using. I tested it under fake names, ran simulations, even pitched it quietly to a small hospital in Oregon who thought they were beta testing a university research tool. Their success rate jumped 9% in a quarter. That was enough. I scaled, hired freelance engineers from around the world, created a shell company to shield development, kept my name off every public-facing document. And then, the real interest came. MedAxis. They've been watching the space for months, buying up smaller platforms and folding them into their larger ecosystem. But NovaSync was different. Our engine was cleaner, our prediction rate faster, and our interface light years ahead. I didn't even have to chase them. One of their VPs reached out to me directly via a secure message through a dev forum. "Is Marcus Blaine open to acquisition talk?" I was. Cautiously. 3 meetings later, I was sitting in a penthouse conference room in Chicago with their executive team, including their sharp-as-glass CEO, Anna Raleigh. She looked at me over the top of her glasses and said, "Why so quiet? This is brilliant work. You're sitting on something huge. Why haven't you gone public?" I sipped my water. Timing. Raymond, seated beside me, gave me a sidelong glance but said nothing. Anna leaned forward, clearly amused. "And what exactly are you waiting for, Mr. Blaine?" I looked her in the eye and smiled. "Graduation season." She laughed. "That's cryptic." I didn't elaborate. The deal took 3 more weeks to finalize. Lawyers drafted contracts thick as bricks. Analysts ran valuation models. MedAxis threw in options, profit sharing, a full exit clause, and a 1-year advisory role. I negotiated a 1-week media blackout after the ink dried. No press. No leaks. No internal memos beyond need-to-know circles. Raymond didn't get it. "You're worth $500 million now, Marcus. What exactly are we hiding for?" I just shrugged. "Let's call it a graduation gift." He didn't laugh, but he did stop asking. He's known me long enough to recognize that when I start speaking in metaphors, there's blood on the floor somewhere. That week, I walked through our house like a man holding 2 lives in his hands, one crumbling, one rising. She came home tired and distracted, talking about her rotation hours, some professor who wanted to mentor her postgrad, and how she might specialize in cardiology. I listened, nodded, even offered to rub her shoulders like I used to. She smiled, grateful but absent. She had already left me in her mind. I could feel it every time her eyes didn't quite meet mine. But she didn't know I had just transferred the final payment into our shared account. 6 years of debt, all gone. The account she thought was modest now had an extra $380,000 in it. My parting gift. I wanted her to think she'd won. That the financial rug was still under her feet. I kept playing the role. Supportive husband. Reliable Marcus. The guy she could count on until she let go of the past. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. There's a stillness that comes when you know how the story ends and everyone else is still fumbling through Act 2. One night, I stayed up late, going over NovaSync's backend infrastructure. It was like checking on a child I'd raised while no one else was looking. Clean code, strong security, proprietary algorithms, it all hummed like a living, breathing thing. She'd never once asked about it, never peeked over my shoulder or inquired about my late nights at the desk. Maybe she didn't care. Or maybe she didn't believe I had anything worth caring about. She was wrong. The morning before her graduation, she was up early, curling her hair and rehearsing her speech in front of the mirror. I watched her through the crack in the door. She looked beautiful, confident, ready to conquer the world. And yet, I couldn't help but feel like I was staring at a stranger wearing my wife's skin. I left a gift box on the kitchen counter before she walked out the door, a silver bracelet with her initials, a small card inside that read, "You made it. Proud of you. M." She texted me a heart emoji an hour later. I didn't respond, because by then, I was already in Raymond's office, signing the final phase of the acquisition. There were cameras, a handshake photo with Anna Raleigh, and a glass of champagne I barely sipped. When it was done, Raymond handed me a manila envelope. "Everything's finalized. Wire confirmation is in. And your press release, set to drop in 2 days, per your request." I nodded. "Good." He tilted his head. "So, are we celebrating?" I stood there, staring out his window at the city skyline. "Not yet. The celebration comes later." He didn't ask when. He didn't have to. He just raised his glass and said, "To the long game." I clinked his glass and whispered, "To the reveal." That night, I returned home before she did. I reheated leftovers, set the table, lit a candle like I used to when she pulled all-nighters. When she walked in with her gown draped over her arm and stress still in her eyes, I kissed her forehead. "You hungry?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Starving." I served her, asked about her day, let her complain about some speech edits and Kayla being late. She didn't know that I knew everything. She didn't notice the slight edge in my smile. She had no idea I had just signed the kind of deal people kill for. She thought I was her safety net. She didn't realize I was the storm. Graduation day came wrapped in sunshine and irony. She was radiant, absolutely glowing. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't stir something in me. There was still a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with underneath all that ambition and detachment, but it was buried under layers of performance, curated smiles, and polished speeches. Still, I played my part. Crisp navy suit, pressed shirt, matching tie, standing beside her like a prop. Just the husband. We parked near the auditorium, her parents riding behind us in their rental, all grins and fuss. Her mother was already crying. Her father, stoic as ever, held a bouquet of pink lilies too tightly, like he was afraid someone might steal the only thing he'd actually contributed to her journey. "You okay?" I asked her as we crossed the pavement. She looked at me briefly, blinking against the sun. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" I shrugged. "It's a big day." She nodded, then walked ahead, heels clacking against the concrete, gown slung over her arm like it weighed nothing. And maybe it didn't. Maybe all those years really had become weightless to her tuition payments, grocery runs, the late-night drives to the emergency room when she got sick, the time I sold my vintage guitar to cover one of her surprise lab fees. Forgotten, or rewritten into something else. Something disposable. Backstage was a flurry of activity. Graduates hugging, fixing each other's caps, lining up alphabetically while parents found their seats. I stood to the side, tucked near a wall, trying not to be in the way. A few of her classmates passed by, offering polite nods or casual glances, the kind you give someone you don't fully recognize but assume must belong. She spotted me from a few feet away and called out, "Marcus, hand me the folder?" I held it out. She took it without looking at me. Then, turning to the woman beside her, she said, "Oh, this is Marcus. Just my husband." Just, that word wasn't new, but hearing it that way, flat, tossed out like an explanation for a misplaced purse. Hit harder than I expected. Not my partner, not my biggest supporter, not even the man who made this possible. Just my husband. I felt like background noise at my own investment. I smiled anyway. "Nice to meet you," her classmate said. "You too," I replied. Then I stepped back, letting her own the space. That was what she wanted, right? To shine without my shadow anywhere near her spotlight. I watched her pose for pictures, adjust her sash, check her makeup in the reflection of her phone. Her eyes scanned the crowd for Kayla, and when she finally spotted her, she lit up. They hugged like sisters. Kayla winked at her. I didn't need to hear what they said. I'd already read enough. But watching it live, that wink, that sly little smirk, it turned something in my gut. I caught Kayla's eyes for a brief moment. Her smile faltered. Good. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and forced inspiration. The dean droned on about perseverance, dedication, the triumph of the human spirit. I clapped when everyone else clapped, cheered when names were called. When it was her turn to walk across the stage, I stood, not out of obligation, but out of closure. I watched her accept her diploma with a glowing smile, watched her grip the hand of the administrator like this was the beginning of her empire. And maybe it was. Just not the one she thought she controlled. The applause died down, the final speaker took the mic, and then it came her moment. She stepped up to the podium like it belonged to her. Confident, poised, beautiful in that high achiever way that demanded admiration. I already knew what was coming. I'd read the speech. Still, part of me hoped she'd changed it. That maybe something in her heart had softened since then. Nope. To new beginnings, she started, smiling out at the sea of caps and families, and to the courage it takes to let go of the past. There it was, word for word. No acknowledgement, not even a glance my way. She spoke of mentors, of late-night studying in libraries, of how her chosen family kept her sane. She thanked Kayla by name. She gave a nod to her professors, to her mother for always believing in her, and to everyone who saw my future even when I couldn't see it myself. Not a single syllable about me. I sat through the rest of the speech like a ghost in my own life. Numb, applauding because it was easier than walking out. I could feel the heat in my chest, disappointment simmering beneath stillness. But I didn't let it break the surface. I just kept smiling. Afterward, the photo frenzy began. Families poured onto the lawn, snapping selfies, throwing caps in the air. Her father insisted on a dozen variations. Just her, just the girls, one with her mom, one with the whole tribe. Finally, she turned to me. Marcus, can you take one of us? Not, can you be in one? Just take it. I nodded, took the phone, captured the moment. Thank you, she said absently, already checking the angles. Then, almost as an afterthought, she slid next to me and said, okay, one quick shot with my husband. The smile she gave for the camera was flawless, professional, detached, rehearsed. Click. That was the photo she would use, probably. Post it with some caption about support and teamwork, just enough to protect her image. But the moment the ink dried on those papers, I knew she'd crop me out of her narrative like I was a smudge on glass. Still, I said nothing. Later that evening, back at our apartment, I handed her the same flowers her father had nearly crushed earlier that morning. She looked at them, smiled politely, and kissed me on the cheek. I'm exhausted, she said. But this was a good day. Yeah, I replied, watching her disappear down the hallway. It was. In a way, it really was. Because while she celebrated her degree, her photos, her perfectly sculpted speech, what she didn't realize was this. The real graduation hadn't been hers. It had been mine. It happened exactly 1 week later, like clockwork. The house was quiet. A soft Tuesday morning sun filtered through the blinds, and the smell of coffee lingered in the kitchen. I'd made breakfast. Her favorite, even. Soft scrambled eggs, toast with honey, and papaya slices she swore helped her digestion. She was scrolling her phone as she ate, barely acknowledging me except for the occasional nod. I watched her over the rim of my mug. There was something surgical in her silence, like she was bracing to deliver a dose of pain she'd already measured. When she finally spoke, her tone was clinical, her words flat. Marcus, she said, not looking up. I've thought a lot about this. It's time we part ways. She didn't even use the word divorce. I put my mug down gently. Part ways. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin manila envelope, sliding it across the table like a receipt. I'll make this easy. Just sign. No need for drama. I didn't touch it. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The same woman who used to fall asleep mid-sentence on the couch with anatomy flashcards in her lap. The same woman I used to pick up from clinicals at midnight, half-frozen and exhausted, clutching fast food bags and murmuring about chest x-rays. Now, she sat across from me calm, rehearsed, detached, as if I were a client she'd finished working with. I opened the envelope slowly, unfolded the papers. It was all there. Neatly typed, itemized, emotionless. She wanted half. Half of everything. The apartment, the car, the furniture, and of course, the business. She listed Novasync as marital property, estimating its value at a modest $80,000, clearly assuming it was just some quirky tech project, nothing of real consequence. Then came the bold part: spousal support, monthly payments, justification, career sacrifice during medical training. She claimed she deferred income potential for the sake of our household, that she deserved ongoing compensation for the years I'd supported her. I stared at the words. I wasn't angry. I was impressed. It was bold, efficient, cold. She didn't flinch as I read. She just sipped her coffee and said, "It's all standard. I've already retained counsel." I folded the papers, placed them back in the envelope, and tapped my fingers on it lightly. "You're sure this is what you want?" She looked at me like I was asking something silly. "It's for the best." I nodded. "All right. Then give me a few days to respond formally." That surprised her. She expected resistance. A fight. Maybe even begging. She'd built this version of me in her head. Passive, dependent, too soft to let go. The same man who cheered her through med school, bought her groceries, and folded her scrubs. She didn't realize that while she was busy planning her escape, I'd already opened the door. She stood, picked up her plate, rinsed it, and turned off the faucet like she'd done it 1,000 times. Like this was just another normal Tuesday. She kissed me on the cheek. "Thanks for breakfast." Then she walked out the door with her white coat draped over her arm and her stethoscope hanging from her neck like a badge of victory. I stood in the kitchen, holding the envelope like it might dissolve if I gripped it too tightly. 3 months ago, she came home in tears because a patient died unexpectedly. I held her for an hour on the bathroom floor while she sobbed into my chest. She told me I was her safe place. Now I was an obstacle. I sat down at my desk and called Raymond. "It's go time." "You got served." "Yep." He chuckled bitterly. "She has no idea, does she?" "None." We set the wheels in motion. He'd already had everything prepared: financial declarations, ownership documentation, digital timestamps, contract history. We had airtight records of when Novasync began, the original LLC formation, the transfer of IP rights. And best of all, we had the acquisition documents, sealed, signed, and dated 3 days after the filing. She thought she'd be walking away with half a startup. She didn't know she'd just forfeited half a fortune. Raymond and I met in his office that afternoon. He flipped through her petition like it was a kindergarten art project. "Spousal support?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Bold. She's entitled to nothing post-filing, right?" "Exactly. Especially since the acquisition wasn't finalized until after she served you. Everything beyond that date is legally yours, free and clear." I nodded slowly. "Let's keep it quiet. No retaliation. No show of force. I want her to believe this is going exactly how she planned." Raymond leaned back in his chair. "You sure about that? You don't want to file a counterclaim yet?" "Not yet," I said. "Let her feel comfortable. Let her think she's winning." He grinned. "You're playing the long game. Always." That night, she came home late. Said she had a rough shift. I listened, nodded, pretended to care. Not because I didn't, but because I knew it didn't matter anymore. Her emotions were no longer my responsibility. Her bad days, her triumphs, her fake apologies, those belonged to the next man naive enough to believe he could build a life with her. We went to bed in silence. She turned her back to me. I stared at the ceiling. 3 more days until the announcement. 3 more days until her perfect little plan unraveled. I closed my eyes and counted backward from 1,000. Not because I was anxious, but because I needed the quiet before the storm. She wanted a clean exit. I was going to give her one. Clean, legal, and absolute. And when it was over, when the truth came out, when the ink dried and the media explosion hit like a wave, she'd look back at that morning and realize just how badly she miscalculated the man sitting across from her. She thought I was soft. She thought I was static. She thought she was walking away with everything. But she was walking away from a $500 million empire. And she didn't even say thank you. It dropped at 9:01 a.m. on a Thursday. Right on schedule. No pre-hype, no teasers. Just a clean, direct press release from MedAxis posted on their official channels. Picked up within seconds by every major tech and healthcare news outlet in the country. MedAxis acquires Novasync in $500 million strategic expansion deal. There it was. My name in black and white, my photo next to Anna Raleigh, CEO of MedAxis, our hands clasped in a firm shake. both of us smiling like a pair of industry titans. I wore that smile like armor. Clean, professional, unbothered. But beneath it, it was war paint. By 9:06, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Emails, calls, texts, contacts I hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Investors who ignored my pitch decks back when I was bootstrapping wanted to grab coffee. Former classmates congratulated me like we'd been best friends all along. LinkedIn lit up like a Christmas tree. But one message made me pause. Her name on the screen. Her. What is this? Marcus. What the hell is this? No. Hi. No, congratulations. Just confusion. Panic. A flicker of dawning comprehension. I stared at the message for a full minute. I could imagine her sitting at the break room table, scrolling through her phone with a confused frown, reading the headline again and again like it might change if she blinked hard enough. I didn't reply. I had nothing to say, not anymore. My words had already been spoken through contracts, valuations, and that perfect headline that confirmed everything she didn't know. Instead of texting back, I opened my calendar and forwarded the contact inquiry from Forbes requesting a short quote for their feature article. I replied simply, "Let's talk legacy." At 10:15 a.m., Raymond called, chuckling so hard he nearly choked. "Brother," he said, "you've officially broken the internet." "Good," I said, sipping my tea. "She texted you yet?" "Of course. She'll call next. Then maybe cry. Then show up. She won't get past Damaris." He laughed again, longer this time. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." By noon, she called 4 times. Damaris, my assistant, had strict instructions: block, log, and forward to legal. Nothing more. But just after lunch, I heard her voice. Not in person. Not directly. Over the phone, in the hallway outside my office. The kind of whisper cry that turned sharp at the edges. Damaris had stepped out to lunch, and one of the interns had buzzed her in without realizing who she was. I stood behind the glass door, listening. "Kayla, I swear to God, I didn't know," she was saying. "He never said a word. Not a single thing. And now it's everywhere. It's on every screen. $500 million. Kayla, he played me." "Played you?" "No. I played the game you started. I just finished it better." Her voice broke. Why didn't I wait? Why didn't I just... God, I filed too early. And there it was. The moment it clicked. She didn't just file for a divorce. She filed herself out of a legacy. I turned the doorknob and stepped out. Her eyes snapped to mine. Red, puffy, mascara trailing ever so slightly. Still beautiful, still composed, but this time, the mask had cracks. "Marcus," she breathed. "Please, can we talk?" I tilted my head. "I think your paperwork said everything." She stepped forward. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. If you had." I interrupted. "If you'd known I was about to be rich, you'd have stayed?" She paused. Just a flicker. That was all the answer I needed. I gestured toward the elevator. "You need to leave." "Marcus, wait. I made a mistake." "No. You made a plan. You just didn't check the timeline." She blinked rapidly, her breath catching. "I was scared, okay? I thought we were done. I didn't think. You didn't think I was worth staying for," I said. "Let's not rewrite it now." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Silence filled the space between us like a verdict. She looked around, suddenly aware of the eyes on her, my team, the interns, Damaris just returning from lunch. People pretending not to look while absolutely looking. She pulled her jacket tighter. "Can we at least talk later?" she asked, voice lower now. I shook my head. "From now on, if you want to talk, you talk to Raymond." The elevator dinged behind her. "Don't do this," she said as the doors slid open. "I'm not doing anything." "You did." And with that, she stepped inside, the doors closing on a face I no longer recognized. That night, I sat at home alone. No music, no noise. Just me, a decanter of scotch, and the TV muted as news anchors discussed my acquisition. It should have felt like victory. Maybe, in some ways, it did. But mostly, it felt like silence. Not sadness. Not joy. Just the sound of a chapter ending. I picked up my phone and checked my emails. Dozens of speaking invitations, media requests, board offers. But I scrolled past them all until I reached the last message forwarded from Raymond's team. Her lawyer. Subject: revised petition. New language. Claims of hidden assets. Attempts to reclassify NovaSync as marital intellectual property. I almost laughed. It was so desperate. So clumsy. She'd finally realized what she walked away from, and now she was trying to climb back in through a legal window already sealed shut. Raymond had already filed the rebuttal. He'd included the original timeline of the acquisition, the NDA proof, and, most damning of all, her own text messages to Kayla, which I had quietly collected and archived. The messages where she joked about using me, where she timed the filing like a business transaction, where she called me useful. Those weren't going to vanish. My legal team wasn't just going to fight back. They were going to bury the strategy she thought was clever under the weight of her own words. I poured another drink and looked around the apartment, the place we picked out together, the kitchen I stocked, the couch she cried on during step 2 boards, the bookshelf with the framed photo of our wedding day tucked between dusty medical volumes, and an old cookbook I used more than she ever did. It was all mine now, not because of the court, but because she'd forfeited it. And the woman who once dreamed of white coats and luxury would now face something she'd never planned for. Irrelevance. The first sign of panic came 3 days after the press release. The apartment smelled different. Not like the clinical peppermint oil she usually diffused or the soy candles that made the place feel like a Pinterest board. No, this was nostalgia. Butterscotch cookies and lavender. She was baking. Voluntarily. I stepped into the kitchen and found her standing there in an apron she hadn't worn in years, the one with a cartoon heart and the words DR in training scrawled across it in faded red. Her hair was tied back, face soft, almost hopeful. "Hey," she said. "I made cookies. Your favorite." I stared at her. Not angrily. Not with suspicion. Just with the calm detachment of a man watching a rerun of a show he'd already outgrown. "Thanks," I said. I took one, bit it, nodded politely, then walked out without another word. That was the beginning of the performance. Suddenly, she was everywhere, offering back rubs, leaving little post-it notes on the bathroom mirror. "You've got this. And proud of you." She started cooking again. Dinner at 6:30, candles lit. She played our old jazz playlist at night like we were a couple reconnecting after a tiff. But her eyes gave her away. They watched me too closely, tracked every movement like a hawk trying to time its descent. She laughed too easily, touched my arm too often. The performance was clumsy, because this wasn't love. This was fear. She was trying to crawl back into the life she threw away. The visits to my office started soon after. The first time, she showed up with lunch. I didn't even let her past reception. Damaris intercepted her with a raised brow and a clipboard. "She says she's just dropping off food." "Note it," I said. "Politely decline." Of course, Damaris replied without missing a beat. She didn't come back empty-handed again, but she kept coming. 3 times the next week. Flowers. Lattes. A handwritten card about healing and forgiveness. All denied entry. All logged. Damaris kept a spreadsheet. Names, dates, items, messages. She was methodical, almost enthusiastic. "She really thinks she's going to wiggle back in," she said one morning, sipping her espresso. "She thinks guilt and charm are assets," I replied. "And she's late to both." I nodded. "Log everything. If she gets aggressive, notify legal." It didn't take long for her lawyer to send a revised petition. The language changed. Now, they accused me of hiding financial gains, intentionally misleading her during the divorce process. They called the MedAxis deal a concealed asset, as if I'd crafted a whole corporate merger just to spite her. Raymond responded with elegance and steel. We submitted her original petition, complete with timestamps that preceded the final acquisition. We added screenshots of the text she sent Kayla about using me, about filing early, about walking away clean. And just for insurance, we included the message logs from Damaris's visitor spreadsheet, highlighting the sudden shift in her behavior after the deal went public. She wasn't just clawing at what she lost. She was exposing her own intent. The last time she tried to show up at my office, building security stopped her. She wasn't on the list. Her name flagged the visitor system now, an alert to my assistant and legal counsel. Damaris texted me a photo, her standing in the lobby, arms folded, frustration written all over her face. "Damaris, she says she just wants to talk. Heart to heart." Me. Heart to heart? We signed the death certificate already. Damaris sent a thumbs up and walked her out personally. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Her lawyer sent another letter. This one was a plea disguised as a warning. Reconsider the terms. Negotiate. Avoid court. Raymond laughed out loud when he read it. She's spiraling. She should. Think she knows what's coming next? She will, I said. When the counter hits. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by silence. My phone buzzed again, this time, a voicemail. I played it on speaker. Her voice cracked. Marcus, I know I messed up. I thought I was doing the right thing for me. I thought I was being brave. But maybe I was just being stupid. Can we talk? Please? I'll sign whatever you want. I just want to fix this. It was the most honest thing she'd said in months. And it was far too late. I forwarded the message to Raymond. The next day, he filed the counter. Not out of spite. Out of principle. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was manipulation followed by attempted cleanup once the target turned out to be more than she bargained for. Raymond's filing was meticulous. 1 count of misrepresentation, 1 of attempted marital fraud, and a clause invoking a breach of verbal agreement. I had the emails, the notes, the voicemails, all documenting her promises to repay me for med school, her acknowledgement that I funded her entire education. It was ironclad. Then came the next blow. An anonymous complaint was filed to the state medical board. A formal ethics review was opened. Someone had submitted a bundle of her text messages. Screen captures. Metadata included. The committee wasn't stupid. They saw exactly what it was. An aspiring physician joking about using someone for financial gain, timing a divorce to avoid sharing future earnings, weaponizing a relationship for personal profit. It didn't matter that it wasn't a felony. It was enough to question her integrity. Enough to trigger a review. When the news reached her, I wasn't there. But Damaris overheard her sobbing in the lobby bathroom. Security was called. She left in tears, clutching her phone, her face pale and pinched. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about letting the truth run its course. She'd walked out on me thinking I was nothing but a temporary stepping stone. But the moment she filed those papers, she kicked off an avalanche. And now, as she scrambled to rebuild the wall she tore down with her own hands, all I had to do was watch. She panicked. I planned. And there was no crawling out from that. It was oddly quiet the morning the countersuit was filed. No thunderstorms. No dramatic music in the background. Just the hum of my espresso machine and the low whir of the dishwasher. I sat at the kitchen island, dressed in a dark Henley and jeans, reading through the finalized document on my tablet. Every word was sharp, calculated, precise. Raymond had outdone himself. Count 1, intentional misrepresentation. Count 2, attempted marital fraud. Count 3, breach of verbal contract. That last one, that was personal. It was the email she never thought I kept, sent from her student account in year 2 of med school. The subject line was casual. My promise, don't let me forget. She had written it after one of her particularly emotional study breakdowns, saying she didn't want to ever forget how much I'd invested in her dream. She'd promised to pay me back for every dime once she became a doctor. She probably assumed I deleted it years ago, but I kept it. Just like I'd kept every transfer receipt, every loan statement, every credit card payment tied to her education. Not because I thought I'd need them, but because when you give someone everything, you want to remember the cost. Raymond had also attached an itemized spreadsheet of what I'd paid over the years. Tuition, $312,000 rent, utilities, textbooks, $48,000 travel, groceries, miscellaneous, $20,000 total. $380,000. Her lawyer responded within hours, asking if we were open to mediation. That's when I knew the countersuit hit harder than expected. They thought we'd cave for a quiet settlement. They didn't realize I wasn't trying to settle. I was trying to set a record. That afternoon, she called. I answered. Marcus, she said softly. We don't have to go through court. I'll sign whatever. Let's just be adults about this. Adults, I said. Like when you joked about using me until the ink dried? She inhaled sharply. You read those texts out of context. I read them with dates and timestamps. That's all the context I needed. Silence on the other end. Then she said, please. I'll withdraw peacefully. I'll give up everything. Just don't ruin my name. That's what it came down to. Not remorse. Not love. Reputation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline outside my window. You ruined your name, not me. I just held up the mirror. She hung up. No apology. Just silence. Later that evening, Raymond called to let me know she was trying to get the case dismissed. She says she wants to move on amicably, he told me. She means quietly. Exactly. Tell her no, I said. We're moving forward. Raymond paused. You sure? I'm not doing this for revenge, Ray. I'm doing this for every person who ever got used and discarded like a stepping stone. I'm doing this so she knows that burning bridges doesn't always mean you get to walk away. He sighed, then said, all right, we'll proceed. But the fallout didn't stop there. By the end of the week, the medical licensing board had confirmed that her ethics hearing would move forward. The evidence had been reviewed. Her character was now a matter of public interest. She went dark on social media, deleted photos, turned off comments. Kayla tried to play damage control, posting vague quotes about people trying to dim your light. It backfired. Screenshots of their text exchanges leaked anonymously. Someone posted them on a pre-med forum. The title read, "This is what entitlement looks like." They were reshared, debated, analyzed. Suddenly, she wasn't an inspiring grad with a glowing future. She was a case study in ambition gone toxic. I didn't need to say a word. The world was doing it for me. One night, Damaris texted me a screenshot of a Reddit thread where someone had dissected the situation in bullet points. At the end, they wrote, "Moral of the story, don't marry someone just to upgrade your status. Especially not someone who reads the fine print better than you." I didn't laugh. I just saved the thread. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted documentation. A record of how someone can try to destroy you and fail. She made one last attempt before the court date. Showed up at the apartment wearing the same outfit she wore the day I proposed to her. I opened the door but didn't let her inside. "Don't you remember us?" she said, voice trembling. "How it used to be." "I remember everything," I said. "That's the difference." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to be your enemy, Marcus. You made that decision when you turned me into your exit strategy." She stood there for a long moment before whispering, "I thought you were just a placeholder." I nodded once. "You were wrong." Then I closed the door. I sat down on the couch, let the silence soak in, and stared at the divorce paperwork again. The original, the revised, the countersuit. All of it laid out like chapters in a book I didn't ask to write. She tried to play the game, but I designed the rules. Courtrooms aren't built for closure. They're built for containment, of emotions, of noise, of mess. They smell like old paper and recycled air. The chairs are never quite comfortable. The clocks tick louder than they should. And when the person who once held your heart walks in wearing a blazer they probably picked for sympathy, it doesn't sting the way you thought it might. It just clarifies everything. She walked in 2 minutes late, flanked by her lawyer, hairstyled in soft curls like it might soften her case. Her expression was pulled tight, a blend of nerves and entitlement. I watched her scan the room, hesitate when she saw me, then look away like I was the one who broke us. She still hadn't realized the difference between leaving and losing. Her lawyer, Richard Kane, was polished. Expensive suit, confident gait, the kind of man who specialized in flipping narratives. He stood when the judge entered, his hands folded neatly, his tone syrup smooth. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about transparency. My client, Dr. Alana Rhodes, entered her marriage with trust. She supported her husband through his business journey, unaware of the substantial financial developments he withheld from her. We argue this was intentional, strategic, an attempt to deprive her of fair marital assets." I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I simply looked at the judge, then at Raymond, who stood calmly beside me, the picture of composed precision. Raymond stepped forward. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Marcus Blaine, was served divorce papers on April 3rd. The MedAxis acquisition was finalized on April 6th. The NDA and internal documents proving the timeline are included in Exhibit A. Moreover, text messages between Dr. Rhodes and her friend. Exhibit B shows she planned to file early in order to keep photos clean and let the ink dry before anything public surfaced. The judge, an older man with tired eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance for drama, adjusted his glasses and flipped through the exhibits. He didn't rush. Every second felt like a hammer pounding against the shell of the story she had tried to build. Richard tried to recover. "These texts are informal, out of context." "Your Honor," Raymond interrupted, "they are time-stamped, dated, and corroborated by the sequence of events." The judge looked at Alana. "Did you file for divorce under the belief that Mr. Blaine's company was of modest value?" She swallowed. "At the time, yes." "Were you aware of the potential deal with MedAxis?" She hesitated. "No," Raymond cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to call Ms. Anna Raleigh to testify." The doors opened. and Anna entered like a force of nature. Elegant, sharp, no nonsense. CEO of MedAxis and arguably one of the most respected figures in the industry. She took the stand. Ms. Raleigh, Raymond began. When did discussions with Mr. Blaine regarding Novasync begin? February 9th, she said, without a blink. Our legal team reached out based on an internal referral. And when was the deal finalized? April 6th. Was there any indication during the early discussions that Mr. Blaine was going through divorce proceedings? No, she replied. The matter came up only after the filing was public. But our NDA predated that. Did he ever misrepresent the value or status of the company to you? Not once. In fact, he was unusually reserved. Cautious, even. Raymond nodded and turned to the judge. Your Honor, the testimony confirms the acquisition did not exist as a legal asset during the time of divorce filing. The plaintiff's claim to half the acquisition is therefore invalid. The judge nodded slowly, jotting notes. Then came the final blow. Raymond brought out the email. Subject: My promise, don't let me forget. He read it aloud in full. Her words, her acknowledgement, her promise to pay back every cent of the $380,000 I had invested in her education. Richard objected. It's emotional, not contractual. Raymond held up a copy of her signature on a follow-up message. It was followed by a written payment plan proposal. Dated. Acknowledged. Never retracted. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked up, leaned forward, and said the words I'd waited 6 months to hear. Spousal support is denied. Claim to Novasync's valuation is denied. Reimbursement of $380,000 in educational support is granted to Mr. Blaine. Her face cracked then. It wasn't just shock. It was the realization that she hadn't just lost her case. She'd lost the story. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. A few reporters in the back began scribbling rapidly. This was going to leak. Even if the docket was sealed temporarily, someone would talk. Richard leaned in toward her, whispering something urgent. She shook her head. Her shoulders slumped. And for the first time, she looked small. Not because she was weak, but because the image she built had finally shattered under the weight of her choices. The judge banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. I stood, buttoned my blazer, and didn't look back. As I walked past her, she glanced up, eyes red but dry. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something. I didn't stop, didn't speak, didn't gloat. Because victory doesn't need a monologue. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter. Raymond slapped my back. Hell of a win. It was never about winning, I said. It was about the truth. Well, the truth just bought you justice and $380,000. I exhaled, slow and deep. She'll never be the same, Raymond said. She already wasn't, I replied. We walked to the car in silence. And when I shut the door behind me, I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the burial of a version of me that once believed love meant unconditional sacrifice. Now I knew better. Love, real love, doesn't demand your silence in exchange for someone else's rise. And when someone treats you like a chapter, you don't wait for the next page. You close the book. 1 month passed. Quietly, without drama, without fireworks. No new texts. No calls. No surprise appearances at my office. She disappeared from my life the same way she tried to erase me from hers, surgical, deliberate, clean. Except this time, the silence wasn't mine to carry. It was hers. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. No postage. Hand-delivered. Cream-colored. With my name written in careful cursive I hadn't seen since our first anniversary. I stared at it for a while, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition. Some things, some people, wrap their guilt in elegance. I opened it. Inside was a check. Partial payment, $75,000. And a single note, written on the same kind of stationery she used for med school thank you cards. I never thought you'd be the one to win. I was wrong. No apology. No explanation. Just 7 words soaked in defeat. I folded the note back into the envelope and walked it to the sink. Watched the flame from a match curl the edges black. Watched the paper curl in on itself like it was trying to disappear. That was the last gift I accepted from her. The rest of my day went on like any other. At the office, the new product team was finalizing the prototype for Novasync Horizon. A portable diagnostic unit that could be deployed in rural clinics with 0 signal latency. I'd hired 10 engineers in the last 3 weeks. The dev floor buzzed with energy. Whiteboards covered in sketches, code snippets, timelines. People solving problems because they believed in the mission, not because they were trying to prove something to someone else. In the corner of my office sat a shelf with one photo frame. Not of her, of me. Sitting at a cracked dining table, coding at midnight under a flickering bulb. I'd taken it during the early days of NovaSync, back when it was just me, caffeine, and an idea I couldn't shake. I kept that photo to remind myself. I didn't build this out of revenge. I built it because I refused to be small. That afternoon, I spoke on a panel for strategic scaling at an innovation conference downtown. I wore a charcoal blazer, no tie, open collar, confident but grounded. As I walked backstage, someone from the event staff handed me a card. "She left this at the front," the girl said hesitantly. "Said you'd understand." I took it, half curious, half exhausted. Opened it. I saw the panel invite. I wanted to be there. I just couldn't. "I'm sorry." I tore it in half, dropped it in the trash. "You don't get to spectate the success you try to sabotage." The panel went well. I talked about scalability, investor pressure, founder fatigue, the importance of building not just for market fit, but for soul fit. The audience leaned in, took notes, asked good questions. Afterward, a young founder approached me. "How did you know it would work?" she asked. I smiled. "I didn't. I just knew I couldn't let someone else's limited vision trap me." She nodded slowly, inspired. I walked away knowing I'd become the man I used to dream about being when I was sleeping on potential. At home that night, I stood in the kitchen alone, stirring a pot of red lentil stew I'd perfected during her third-year rotations. Back then, I made it for her. Tonight, I made it for me. The difference tasted like peace. I took my bowl out to the balcony, looked out over the skyline, and let the city hum around me. There was no applause, no echo of footsteps down the hall. Just my breath, steady and strong. My phone buzzed. "Raymond, check your inbox," he said. "Your TEDx pitch got accepted." I smiled. "What's the theme?" "Reclaiming power. You were born for this." I nodded, then ended the call. Later, I opened a folder on my laptop titled Future. Inside were drafts, ideas, sketched outlines for a mentorship fund, something I'd been thinking about launching. A way to support people who, like me, had built everything while being overlooked. Maybe I'd call it the Invisible Builder Fund. It wasn't about charity. It was about recognition, about making sure no one had to prove their worth in silence ever again. A week after the check arrived, I received a LinkedIn request from her. No message, no note. I declined it without hesitation. She had graduated, but I had evolved. She delivered a speech about letting go of the past, but I turned that past into capital, into ownership, into something that couldn't be cropped out of a photo or buried in a revised petition. She played the short game. I built a legacy. Somewhere out there, she was probably trying to rebuild her image, praying the medical board cleared her ethics review. Maybe she'd get lucky. Maybe she wouldn't. But either way, her future would carry the stain of a plan gone wrong, and the name of the man who refused to be erased. As for me, I didn't need closure. I didn't need vindication. I'd already received the only graduation gift I ever truly wanted, freedom. And the view from this side of peace? It was worth every bill I ever paid. It was nearing the end of a long and exhausting day at the office when my phone rang. I looked down at the caller ID and saw Emma's name flashing on the screen. It was odd for her to call me during work hours, especially since she knew I was buried under deadlines. Still, I answered, hoping she was calling to check in or just to talk like we used to. But when I heard her voice, something was off. The usual warmth wasn't there, and a chill ran through me at the tone in her words. "David," she said, her voice steady, almost cold, "I think it's time we end this. I want a divorce." My heart skipped a beat, and I froze for a moment, struggling to comprehend what she had just said. Divorce? It didn't make sense. We'd had our ups and downs, sure, but nothing to suggest this. Nothing that would warrant a decision this drastic. What? I stammered, my mind racing as I tried to grasp her words. "Why? Emma, are you serious?" "I've thought about this a lot," she replied, her voice distant. I don't want to be with you anymore. It's over." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I could feel my chest tightening as a wave of confusion and shock washed over me. I couldn't understand. Where had this come from? We had our issues, but this? A divorce out of nowhere? She didn't even want to talk about it. Emma, wait, I began, trying to process what was happening, but she cut me off. I don't want to discuss it with you right now, she said bluntly. I've already spoken to my lawyer. If you have any questions, you can speak with him. The line went dead. Just like that. No explanation. No chance to understand what had brought us to this moment. I stood there, staring at my phone, my hand shaking. Divorce. The word kept echoing in my mind, and I couldn't escape it. I'd never seen it coming. I thought we were fine. But now, I was left holding the pieces of a marriage I had believed in. Pieces that no longer fit together. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to collapse, to lose myself in the raw emotion of it all, but I knew I had to act. I couldn't let this break me. Not now. Not when I still had questions, when I still had things I needed to understand. Taking a deep breath, I decided to follow her instructions. I would meet with her lawyer. I had to know why this was happening, and why it felt like I was being left with no answers. The ride home felt like a dream. No, a nightmare. I barely registered the turns, the stoplights, or the familiar streets I had driven down countless times before. Everything around me looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The city moved at its usual pace, oblivious to the fact that my world had just collapsed with a single phone call. When I pulled into the driveway, my hands were still shaking. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to ground myself, trying to push back the crushing sense of loss that threatened to consume me. I had always assumed that if something was wrong, Emma and I would talk about it, work through it together. But she had made a decision without me, as if our marriage was something she could discard like an old piece of clothing. Steeling myself, I finally stepped out of the car and walked into the house. It felt empty, not physically. Her things were still here, the furniture was untouched, the smell of her perfume still lingered in the air. But there was something missing. The energy, the warmth, the sense of belonging I used to feel in this space. It was all gone. I set my briefcase down by the door, moving on autopilot, my body going through the motions while my mind remained stuck in that last conversation. Divorce. I still couldn't believe it. How had it come to this? I walked into the living room and sat down heavily on the couch. The silence pressed against me, deafening in a way I had never noticed before. I glanced at the pictures on the wall. Our wedding photo, a vacation picture from our trip to Italy, a candid shot of us laughing in the kitchen. Memories of a life I thought was still intact. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had gone wrong, why she hadn't talked to me first, why she had blindsided me like this. But Emma wasn't here. She had left me to figure it out on my own. I considered calling her back, demanding an explanation, but I knew it would be pointless. She had made up her mind. Her voice had been final, emotionless. It wasn't a conversation. It was a statement. Frustration bubbled up inside me, mixing with the ache of betrayal. Had I missed the signs? Had she been planning this for weeks? Months? My mind raced through every argument, every cold glance, every moment of distance between us. But none of it had felt like the end. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. I had a choice. I could let this news break me, let it consume me, or I could face it head-on. Emma had made her decision without me, but I still had power over how I handled this. My phone sat on the coffee table, taunting me. I picked it up, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name she had given me. Henry Clark, her lawyer. I clenched my jaw. If Emma wouldn't talk to me, then I would get my answers another way. I pressed the call button, my heart pounding in my chest. A few rings later, a voice answered. Henry Clark's office. How may I help you? I took a breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. My name is David Lopez. I was told to contact Mr. Clark regarding my wife, Emma Lopez. There was a slight pause on the other end, as if the person hesitated before responding. Ah, yes, Mr. Lopez. Please hold for one moment. I waited, my grip tightening around the phone, My mind raced with possibilities. What was she hiding? Why had she rushed into this without warning? And why did I have this sinking feeling that this was only the beginning? The hold music played in my ear, a soulless melody that only heightened the tension building in my chest. I tapped my fingers against my knee, trying to keep my breathing steady. I had no idea what to expect from this meeting. All I knew was that Emma had made it clear. If I wanted answers, I'd have to get them from her lawyer, not her. After what felt like an eternity, a voice came through the line. Mr. Lopez? Yes, I answered immediately. This is Henry Clark. The voice was professional, but had a slight edge to it. I was expecting your call. Can we schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning? I swallowed hard. I'd rather meet today. A pause. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Lopez. Tomorrow at 10. My office. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't a conversation. It was an instruction, just like Emma's call had been. Fine, I said. I'll be there. The next morning, I stood outside Henry Clark's office building, staring up at the reflective glass windows. I felt like an outsider looking into a world I didn't belong to. I had never needed a lawyer before. I had never imagined I would be standing here, preparing to negotiate the end of my marriage. I took a breath and stepped inside. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. The receptionist greeted me with a polite but distant smile. Mr. Lopez, Mr. Clark is expecting you. I nodded and followed her down a quiet hallway. She opened a door to a sleek, modern office, and there he was, Henry Clark. The man sitting behind the desk looked polished and calculated, with silver-rimmed glasses and neatly combed dark hair. But as soon as I stepped inside and said my name, something strange happened. His hand, which had been holding a pen, trembled slightly. His jaw tightened as he slowly looked up at me. His face, which had been calm and composed, paled just enough for me to notice. I frowned. Mr. Clark? He blinked rapidly, then straightened in his chair, trying to regain his composure. Yes, please, have a seat. I sat down, my mind racing. What was that reaction? Why did he suddenly look unsettled? Henry cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. I assume Emma informed you about the proceedings. Barely, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She told me to talk to you instead of her. He nodded, flipping through a file. His fingers twitched slightly as he turned the pages. Whatever was in that file had him on edge. This is a straightforward case, Mr. Lopez, he said, his voice measured. Emma is filing for divorce, and we're prepared to discuss the division of assets. Why? I asked bluntly. He looked up. Excuse me? Why is she doing this? My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding. I want to know the real reason. She didn't give me one. Henry exhaled and leaned back in his chair. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. Emma believes that this is the best course of action for both of you. I stared at him. That wasn't an answer. That was a scripted response. I leaned forward. What aren't you telling me? His fingers twitched again, gripping the edges of the file. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, for the first time, I saw it. The guilt in his eyes. Something was wrong. Something big. And whatever it was, Henry Clark wasn't sure if he should tell me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there, watching Henry Clark as his fingers twitched against the edge of my divorce file. His expression was composed, but his body language betrayed him. His hesitation, the way he shifted in his chair, the way he avoided direct eye contact for just a second too long. He was hiding something. I leaned forward, keeping my voice controlled. Mr. Clark, I asked you a simple question. Why is my wife divorcing me? And don't give me another lawyer-approved response. I want the truth. His lips pressed together in a thin line. He tapped his fingers against the desk. Then, with a slow exhale, he removed his glasses and set them down beside the file. Mr. Lopez, he started, his tone cautious. There's something you should know. I waited, my pulse pounding in my ears. There has been a recent development in your financial status, he continued, choosing his words carefully. One that, let's just say, Emma became aware of before you did. A frown tugged at my brow. What are you talking about? He hesitated. But then he opened the file, flipping a few pages forward before sliding a sheet of paper toward me. I glanced down at the document. It looked official, some kind of financial statement, and then I saw the number. $1,513,000. I stared at it. My mind went blank. What is this? I asked slowly, my mouth dry. Henry clasped his hands together. It's your inheritance. I blinked. My what? Your inheritance, he repeated. From a distant relative. A great-uncle, I believe. He passed away recently, and you were named in his will. The funds were just finalized last week. I sat back, feeling as if the room had tilted sideways. Inheritance? $1.5 million? I had never heard of any great-uncle leaving me money. Why hadn't I been informed earlier? As if reading my thoughts, Henry adjusted in his chair. The legal paperwork was still being processed when Emma became aware of it. It appears she had access to some of your mail and financial statements. She filed for divorce shortly after. The words hit me like a slap. She knew. Emma had known about this before I did. And the moment she found out, she decided to leave me. I clenched my jaw, gripping the arms of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. The betrayal settled over me like a thick fog. You're telling me my wife filed for divorce because she thought she could get half of this? My voice was lower now, more controlled, but there was a storm brewing inside me. Henry didn't respond immediately. Then, finally, he said, I can't speculate on her motives, but given the timing, it's highly likely. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Of course, that was what this was about. I had spent the last 24 hours questioning everything, wondering where things had gone wrong, believing I had failed in some way. But it had nothing to do with love, nothing to do with our marriage. It was about money. It was always about money. I rubbed my temples, exhaling slowly. My mind was racing. How long had she been planning this? Had she ever really loved me? Or had I just been a placeholder, someone stable and convenient, until something better, something richer, came along? I looked back at Henry, my voice steadier now. What happens next? He shifted in his chair again. Well, Mr. Lopez, if you proceed with a contested divorce, Emma may attempt to claim a portion of your inheritance. However, inheritance laws vary depending on how the assets are classified. If the money is kept separate from marital funds, she may have no legal claim to it. My mind clicked into gear. Separate. That was the key word. I had to act fast. Emma had blindsided me, thinking I would roll over and let her take what she wanted. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't going to be her fool. I wasn't going to let her win. Henry was still watching me carefully. Mr. Lopez, what do you want to do next? I took a deep breath, pushing down the fury simmering beneath my skin. We fight, I said. I left Henry Clark's office with a fire burning in my chest. The air outside was crisp, but it did nothing to cool the rage simmering inside me. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white as I drove home. The reality of Emma's betrayal was settling in, and the more I thought about it, the more disgusted I became. She had known. She had known about the inheritance before I did. And instead of telling me, instead of having a conversation like a decent human being, she had gone behind my back and filed for divorce, thinking she could walk away with half of it. How long had she been planning this? How long had I been living with someone who had been scheming behind my back? By the time I pulled into my driveway, my jaw was clenched so tightly that I thought my teeth might crack. I needed to think. I needed to be smart. If I let my emotions control me, I would lose. I walked into the house, shutting the door behind me, and took a deep breath. The house still smelled like her, like vanilla and jasmine, her favorite scent. But that warmth I used to feel when I stepped inside was gone. The place felt hollow, as if the walls themselves had betrayed me too. I stood in the middle of the living room, my mind racing. Emma wasn't just leaving me. She was trying to rob me. I had two choices. I could let this play out the way she wanted, watch as she took a chunk of money that she never earned, or I could take control. There was no question about it. I wasn't going to let her walk away with something she didn't deserve. I needed a plan. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Chris Evans. Chris wasn't just my best friend. He was also a damn good lawyer. And unlike Henry Clark, who had been working for Emma, Chris was someone I could trust. I hit call and waited. It rang twice before he picked up. David. His voice was cautious. What's up? I need your help, I said, my voice steady but firm. Emma's divorcing me, and she's after my inheritance. There was a pause. Then, a low whistle. Damn, he muttered. I was hoping I'd never have to hear those words. Yeah, I said bitterly. Join the club. All right, Chris said, switching into his lawyer voice. Tell me everything. I paced the living room, explaining the situation. The unexpected phone call, the coldness in Emma's voice, the strange way Henry Clark had reacted when he saw me, and finally, the bombshell about the inheritance. Chris listened carefully, not interrupting until I finished. Then he exhaled sharply. She knew, he said. She found out about the money and timed the divorce to make sure she could get her cut. Exactly, I said. So what do I do? First things first, Chris said, his voice turning sharp. Do not put that money in your joint account. Do you hear me? If even $1 of it mixes with your shared finances, she can argue that it's marital property. I haven't touched it yet, I assured him. Good, Chris said. We're going to make sure she walks away with nothing. Hearing those words sent a surge of satisfaction through me. I had been blindsided by Emma's betrayal, but I wasn't going to let her win. Chris continued, we need to move fast. I'll file a motion to ensure that the inheritance stays separate. In the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't do anything rash. I exhaled. No promises. Chris chuckled. I mean it, man. Emma's playing dirty, but you can't let that mess with your head. You have the upper hand here, but only if you stay smart. I rubbed my forehead, exhaustion creeping in. This is insane, Chris. I thought we were happy. I stopped myself. What was the point of dwelling on it? Emma had made her decision. Chris sighed. I know, man. But look at it this way. She showed her true colors before it was too late. Now, you have the chance to take control. He was right. I could sit around feeling sorry for myself, or I could fight. I straightened my shoulders. All right, let's do this. Chris's voice was firm. I'll start the paperwork. You focus on keeping a cool head. We're gonna make sure she regrets this. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thanks, Chris. Always, man. I hung up and exhaled. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was war, and I was ready for battle. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in days. The weight of betrayal was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It was fueling me. Emma thought she had everything under control. She thought I'd roll over, sign the divorce papers, and let her take a piece of my inheritance. She was wrong. I grabbed my phone and checked my messages. Chris had already sent over some initial documents, outlining the first steps to legally securing my inheritance as separate property. I responded with a quick got it. Let's move fast. Then, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started cleaning out my joint accounts. Chris had warned me, if a single dollar of that inheritance mixed with our shared finances, Emma could argue that it was marital property. So I didn't waste time. I transferred my personal savings to an account under my name only. I made sure my paycheck deposits were rerouted. Emma hadn't emptied our joint account yet, which told me one thing. She was waiting, probably planning to withdraw a lump sum when she thought I wouldn't notice. But I noticed, and I wasn't going to let her steal from me. With my finances secured, I moved on to my next step, gathering information. I sat at my desk, staring at our shared bills, emails, and records. I started looking through past transactions, trying to figure out exactly when Emma might have learned about the inheritance. And then, something clicked. 3 months ago, there had been an unusual charge on our shared credit card, a payment to a private investigator. I frowned. Why would Emma hire a PI? I pulled up the transaction details and saw the name of the agency. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about the inheritance. Emma had been investigating me. I had no idea what she had been looking for. Infidelity? Secret bank accounts? Was she hoping to catch me in something that would help her in the divorce? But the irony was, I hadn't done anything wrong. She was the one plotting behind my back. I grabbed my phone and dialed Chris. Tell me you have good news, he answered. I have something better, I said. Emma hired a private investigator months ago. Chris whistled. Well, that's interesting. Any idea what she was looking for? No clue, I admitted. But it means she was planning this for a while. She wasn't just reacting to the inheritance. She was setting this up. Chris hummed thoughtfully. That could work in our favor. If we can prove she was manipulating the situation, it strengthens your case. I nodded, gripping my phone tighter. Then let's find out exactly what she was up to. Chris chuckled. Now you're thinking like a lawyer. I hung up, my mind racing. Emma had played her game well, but she had underestimated me. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought she controlled the narrative. But now, it was my turn to take control. And I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make sure she regretted ever trying to betray me. I had spent the past few days gathering everything I needed. Bank records, legal paperwork, copies of the credit card transactions. Anything that could paint a clear picture of what Emma had been doing behind my back. Every piece of evidence confirmed what I had already suspected. She had been planning this divorce long before I even knew about the inheritance. And now, it was time to confront her. I texted Emma earlier in the day, keeping it short. David ***, we need to talk. Face to face. Tonight. Her response came quickly. Emma ***, there's nothing left to talk about. David ***, you sure about that? Because I know what you've been up to. There was a pause before she replied. Emma ***, fine. 7 p.m. Our place. I stared at the message, my pulse steady. She didn't sound nervous, which meant she still believed she had the upper hand. She thought she could control this situation. She had no idea what was coming. At exactly 7 p.m., I walked into the house that used to feel like home but now felt like enemy territory. Emma was already there, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. She barely looked at me as I entered, her expression neutral, detached. You wanted to talk, she said flatly. So talk. I stood in front of her, hands in my pockets, keeping my voice calm. When were you going to tell me you hired a private investigator? Her face barely flickered, but I caught the briefest hesitation before she responded. What are you talking about? I smirked, shaking my head. Come on, Emma. Don't insult my intelligence. I went through our financial records. 3 months ago, you made a payment to a private investigation firm. I want to know why. She inhaled sharply, her mask of indifference slipping just a little. That's none of your business. Oh, but it is, I said, stepping closer. Because that means you were planning this long before you even knew about the inheritance. So tell me, what were you hoping to find? She clenched her jaw, but I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to spin this. Did you think I was cheating? I pressed. Did you think you'd find something that would make the divorce easier for you? Or were you just looking for a way to justify what you were about to do? Her lips tightened. I don't have to explain myself to you. I laughed, shaking my head. No, you don't. Because the truth is already obvious. You were done with this marriage long before you filed the papers. You were just looking for an excuse. And when you found out about the inheritance, you decided to speed things up, didn't you? Her eyes flashed with something. Anger, maybe, or frustration at being caught. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough, I countered. I know that you thought you could take half of what isn't yours. I know you thought I'd be too blind to see what was happening. But you made one mistake, Emma. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. And what's that? You underestimated me. The room was silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Emma's fingers tightened around the armrest of the couch, her knuckles white. You think you're going to walk away from this with everything, don't you? She said, her voice lower now. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. I think I'm going to make sure you don't take what doesn't belong to you. She stood up abruptly, her breath coming faster. You can't prove anything? Can't I? I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. I have the bank records, the transaction details, a paper trail that shows exactly what you were up to. And guess what, Emma? I also have legal counsel that actually gives a damn about my interests. Unlike your lawyer, who, by the way, doesn't seem too comfortable with what you're trying to pull. She froze. Henry? I smirked. Yeah, Turns out even he has a conscience. And he knows this is a losing battle for you. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in her before. Fear. She had played her game well, but she hadn't expected me to fight back. She had expected the old David, the one who let things slide, the one who didn't push back, the one who always trusted her. But that David was gone. I stepped back, exhaling slowly. This is your last chance, Emma. We can settle this fairly. You walk away with what you brought into this marriage, and I walk away with what's mine. She scoffed again, but her voice wavered. And if I don't? Then you lose everything, I said simply. I'll drag this through court. I'll make sure every dirty little detail of your plan comes to light. And trust me, you don't want that. She stared at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Was it regret? Or just the realization that she had lost? Finally, she looked away. I need time to think. I nodded. Take all the time you want. But understand this. I'm not the man you thought you could manipulate. That man doesn't exist anymore. I turned and walked out the door, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The battle wasn't over, but I had just won the first round. The confrontation with Emma had gone better than I expected, but I wasn't naive enough to think she'd back down so easily. She needed time to think? No, she needed time to strategize, to figure out her next move. And so did I. The next morning, I was sipping my coffee, trying to shake off the weight of last night's conversation, when my phone rang. I frowned when I saw the caller ID. Henry Clark, Emma's lawyer. I hesitated before answering. Clark. A brief pause. Mr. Lopez, I assume you have a moment? I leaned against the counter, narrowing my eyes. Depends. What exactly are we talking about here? Another pause. Then, a quiet sigh. I wanted to speak with you privately, without Emma's involvement. There are things I believe you should know. That got my attention. My grip on the phone tightened. Go on. I don't feel comfortable with how this case has unfolded, Henry admitted, his voice lower now. Emma approached me with the divorce plan weeks ago, and at the time, I didn't question it. But after our last meeting, I started reviewing some of the details more closely. There are things about this case that don't sit right with me. I walked to the window, watching the city stretch out beneath me. You mean the part where she planned to rob me? Henry cleared his throat. Among other things. I smirked. I thought lawyers weren't supposed to have a conscience. Some of us do, he said stiffly. And some of us don't appreciate being manipulated. That was interesting. So, why are you telling me this? Henry hesitated before answering. Because I don't believe Emma has told you the whole truth. About the inheritance. About why she really wants the divorce. I froze. What are you talking about? Henry's voice lowered. I need to be careful about what I say here, but I will tell you this. Emma has been making significant financial moves in the past few months. Transactions that don't add up for someone planning a simple separation. There's something else at play here, something bigger than just the money she thinks she can take from you. My pulse quickened. You're saying she was doing more than just hiring a PI? Much more, Henry confirmed. I can't share privileged client information, but I can tell you this. She's not just walking away. She has a plan. And whatever that plan is, it's not just about divorce. A slow, cold realization settled over me. Emma hadn't just been preparing for a divorce. She had been moving money. I clenched my jaw. How do I find out exactly what she's been up to? Henry exhaled sharply. Look into your joint accounts. Look into any business dealings she's had. Anything unusual, investments, loans, sudden withdrawals. If I were you, I'd be very careful about what's coming next. Emma isn't just leaving you. She's rebuilding her life on your money. My stomach twisted. I thought I had already seen the worst of her betrayal, but this was something else. I appreciate the warning, I said, my voice tight. Henry hesitated again before speaking. Mr. Lopez, be smart about this. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. If you make the right moves, you'll come out on top. I smirked. Oh, don't worry, Clark. I have every intention of coming out on top. I ended the call and set my phone down, my mind already racing. Emma wasn't just trying to take what wasn't hers. She was hiding something. And now, I was going to find out exactly what it was. She thought she could win. She had no idea who she was up against. I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen, the weight of Henry's warning settling over me like a thick fog. Emma hadn't just been planning a divorce. She had been planning something bigger, something dangerous. I took Henry's advice and started digging. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Emma had been moving money. Our joint accounts had seen steady withdrawals over the past 6 months, small enough not to raise immediate suspicion, but significant enough when added together. Tens of thousands of dollars had disappeared. At first, I thought she was just stashing money away for the divorce, but then I found something worse. She had been investing, under a different name. My chest tightened as I stared at the documents I had pulled up. Emma had set up a separate business account, registered under an alias I didn't recognize at first, until I saw the listed email address. It was hers. She had been funneling our money into something off the books, something I wasn't supposed to find, and she had been doing it long before she filed for divorce. I clenched my jaw. She wasn't just trying to take half of my inheritance. She had already been stealing from me for months. I needed to move. Fast. I picked up my phone and called Chris. He answered on the first ring. "Tell me you have good news." "Oh, I have something," I said, my voice sharp. "Emma's been moving money, setting up investments under a fake name." Chris whistled. "That's fraud." "Exactly," I said, "and I'm going to use it against her." Chris was quiet for a moment, then he exhaled. "All right, here's what we do. We take this straight to her lawyer. We make it very clear that if she pushes for anything in the divorce, we'll expose everything." I smirked. "Leverage." "Leverage," Chris confirmed. "And trust me, she won't want this going to court. Fraud cases? That's serious. She could lose everything." I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. "She wanted to play dirty," I said. "She thought she could win." Chris chuckled. "And now? Now she's cornered." The next day, I walked into Henry Clark's office with Chris at my side. Henry was already seated, his face unreadable. Across from him, Emma sat stiffly, her arms crossed, her expression cold. I didn't waste time. I pulled out the files I had printed, the evidence of her hidden accounts, her investments, and slid them across the table toward her. Emma glanced down, but for the first time, I saw panic flash in her eyes. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. I tilted my head. "Come on, Emma. Don't insult me." Her lawyer, a woman I hadn't met before, leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Lopez, what exactly are you implying?" Chris smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're not implying anything. We're stating facts. Your client has been illegally funneling joint funds into private investments under a false identity. That's fraud." The room went silent. Emma's lawyer glanced at her sharply. "Emma, is this true?" Emma's face was pale now. She swallowed hard. That's not what it looks like." "Oh, but it is," I said, leaning forward. "And here's the deal, Emma. You drop the divorce settlement. You take what you came into this marriage with, and you walk away. If you don't, we take this to court. And trust me, you won't like what happens next." She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She had lost. Her lawyer turned to her. "Emma, I strongly suggest we reconsider our approach." Emma's eyes flickered to mine, a mixture of fury and defeat swirling within them. But I didn't care. She had planned to destroy me, but I had destroyed her first. Finally, after a long silence, Emma exhaled sharply and looked away. "Fine." Chris smirked. "Smart choice." Henry Clark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Well then, I believe we have an agreement." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "Pleasure doing business with you, Emma." She didn't look at me. She couldn't. I walked out of that office with my freedom, and I had never felt better. Walking out of Henry Clark's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. It was over. Emma had lost. She had tried to play the game, to manipulate me, to steal from me. But in the end, she had only played herself. Chris and I stepped outside, the sun hitting my face as I took in a deep breath of fresh air. "You okay?" Chris asked, stuffing his hands in his pockets. I let out a low chuckle. More than okay. We stood there for a moment, the weight of everything settling. It wasn't just about winning the legal battle. It was about getting my life back. For so long, I had been trapped in a marriage that I didn't even realize was broken. I had trusted Emma. I had built a life with her, believing we were in it together. But she had been playing a different game all along. Chris patted me on the back. I gotta say, man, that was satisfying. Seeing her face when you dropped that bomb? Priceless. I smirked. She thought she was the smartest person in the room. And now? Now she's walking away with nothing. Chris grinned. Damn right. The following weeks were a blur of legal formalities. The divorce was finalized quicker than expected. Emma didn't fight the terms. She couldn't. With the fraud evidence hanging over her, she had no leverage. She agreed to take only what she brought into the marriage. No settlement, no claim to my inheritance. She left the house, packed her things, and disappeared from my life. I thought I'd feel empty. That after years of being with someone, I'd struggle with the silence, the absence of her presence. But I didn't. Instead, the silence felt like freedom. I no longer walked into my home, feeling like I had to tiptoe around tension. I no longer had to question whether the person beside me truly had my back. For the first time in a long time, I was in control of my own life. One evening, Chris and I sat at a bar, toasting to the end of my marriage. So, Chris said, sipping his drink, what's next for you? I leaned back, swirling my glass. Honestly, I don't know. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. I had spent so much time chasing stability, trying to build something that I thought was safe. But now, I realized that life wasn't about just existing. It was about living. Chris smirked. Well, whatever's next, just don't marry another gold digger. I laughed, shaking my head. Noted. A few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. Emma, I hope you're happy. I stared at the text for a moment before deleting it. I was happy. For the first time in years, I truly was. And this was only the beginning. The day my divorce was finalized, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I had been through hell and back, but the man looking back at me wasn't the same one who had answered that devastating phone call weeks ago. I was free, not just from Emma, not just from the legal battle, but from the version of myself that had been stuck in the past, chasing a marriage that never really existed, clinging to a life that had been built on deception. For the first time in years, I felt light. I had spent so long believing that stability meant happiness, that as long as I kept my head down, worked hard, and played it safe, everything would be fine. But now, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. Life doesn't reward the ones who stay comfortable. It rewards those who take control. A month later, I sold the house. Too many memories were tied to it. Good ones, bad ones, all of them tangled together in a way that I didn't want to keep carrying. Emma had left, but the ghost of our relationship still lingered in the walls. I didn't need that. I needed a fresh start. So I packed up what little I wanted to keep, signed the final paperwork, and walked away from the place that had once been my home. And just like that, I was truly free. With the divorce behind me, I focused on rebuilding. Chris had been right. Winning wasn't just about making sure Emma got nothing. It was about making sure I got everything I deserved. I used part of my inheritance to invest in myself. For years, I had been stuck in a job I didn't care about, going through the motions. That ended now. I took courses, met with business advisors, and finally started working on a project that actually meant something to me. I had money. I had knowledge. And now, I had purpose. And damn, it felt good. One evening, I was sitting at a cafe, enjoying the quiet, when a woman sat down at the table across from me. She had a kind smile, bright eyes, and a confidence that caught me off guard. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, holding a coffee in her hand. I looked up, meeting her gaze. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking at someone with suspicion or fear of betrayal. I was just interested. I smiled. Not at all. And just like that, a new chapter began. Emma had tried to break me. She had tried to take what wasn't hers, tried to tear me down, thinking I would never recover. But I did. I came out of this stronger, smarter, and ready for whatever came next. Because life wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about building the future. And I was just getting started. I still remember the smell of burnt coffee from the break room that morning. Mondays always had a weight to them, but this one felt different. Thick. The kind of heavy air you get right before a thunderstorm rolls through. I was halfway through my usual checklist, supply reports, shipping projections, back-end logistics, when my assistant walked in with an odd look on her face. Mr. Grant. Trent wants to see you. Now. She didn't meet my eyes. Just left the room as quickly as she entered. That alone told me something wasn't right. Trent never summoned anyone from operations unless he wanted to bark orders or steal credit. But calling me to the top floor? That was new. And with Frederick out recovering from surgery, something told me this wasn't going to be a courtesy chat. I straightened my tie, took a slow breath, and walked the long hallway to the executive wing. The doors to the boardroom were wide open. Trent was already sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place. His back was straight, jaw clenched, fingers tapping the wood in some slow, practiced rhythm, like a man trying to imitate power without knowing what it truly felt like. He wore one of those smug grins that always made me think of frat boys on power trips. And of course, Evelyn was there too, sitting off to the side like some queen mother watching her son seize the throne. "Ah, Silas," Trent said, voice thick with false charm. "Come in. Take a seat." I didn't. I stayed standing. He leaned back and laced his fingers. "Let's not waste time. Effective immediately. You're fired." Just like that. No explanation. No warning. Just a slap of finality wrapped in fake professionalism. I blinked once, slowly. "You're firing me?" He smirked like he'd been rehearsing this moment in his bathroom mirror for months. "Mom said you were only here because Dad pitted you. That this was always a charity case." I didn't respond at first. I just studied his face, the little twitch near his eye, the way his throat pulsed like he wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. I'd seen that look before. The look of a man bluffing with cards he didn't even know the value of. Then I said it. Calm. Steady. "You'll regret this." His smile faltered just a touch. But it came back just as quickly, now fueled by rage. "Regret." He spat. "You think you can threaten me?" Then, whack. His palm cracked across my cheek before I could even process it. Silence. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just let the sting burn into my skin and memory. 2 security guards stepped in on cue, as if waiting behind the door the entire time. Trent gestured lazily toward me. "Escort him out." Now. The guards hesitated, probably confused why they were dragging out the operations director in the middle of a Monday morning. But orders were orders, and they took me by the arms like I was a trespasser, not a man who'd spent the last 5 years keeping the company's supply chain from collapsing. As they walked me through the main floor, dozens of eyes followed. Staring, judging. Some looked away out of guilt. Others looked curious, maybe even relieved. Not a single voice spoke up. And then I saw her, Marielle, standing by the marketing wing, holding a tablet and wearing that red coat she loved so much. She saw me. She saw everything. My face. The guards. The humiliation. Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't part. She just stood there and watched. Like a stranger. She didn't move. That told me more than words ever could. I didn't fight the security guards. I didn't argue. I walked with them. Past the glass offices. The open lounges. The elevator banks. I watched my reflection in every mirrored surface as we moved through the building I'd quietly helped keep alive. Not for power. Not for show. But because I believed in earning respect the slow way, the honest way. By the time we reached the main entrance, I felt the weight of every second I'd spent pretending I didn't mind being overlooked. I stepped out into the wind and adjusted my collar. The glass doors slid shut behind me. I could almost hear them sigh as they locked. That slap still burned on my face. But it was nothing compared to the fire building in my chest. I pulled out my phone. It buzzed in my palm. Text from logistics, finance, 2 vendor reps asking why I hadn't responded to their emails. I typed a brief reply to all of them. Out for the day? We'll update you soon. Then I walked. Slowly. Deliberately. Not to the parking lot. Not to the train station. But 3 blocks east. Into a quiet building that looked like an old insurance firm from the outside. No sign. No receptionist. Just a keycard reader. I tapped mine against the scanner. The door opened. Inside was a single office. Modern. Clean. Private. Mine. They didn't know about this place. Not Marielle. Not Trent. Not even Evelyn. Frederick did, of course. He helped me set it up. Years ago. When he first whispered the words I'd never forget. Someday, you'll need a space where you're not pretending to be small. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. Sat down, breathed, let the silence wrap around me like armor. They thought I was just an operations guy, just the quiet son-in-law who got lucky marrying the founder's daughter. They didn't know about the shares, about the legacy clause, about the structure Frederick and I built to protect the company from them. Let them enjoy their little victory. Let them laugh, gossip, and pat each other on the back for finally getting rid of me. Let them think it's over. Because it wasn't. It was just beginning. They say betrayal doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks in with soft shoes and a quiet smile. That's what kept echoing in my mind as I sat in my private office, staring out at the city. From this side of the glass, the world seemed calm, orderly. But inside me, something colder had settled in. It wasn't just the slap or the firing that lingered. It was the silence, the kind that pierces deeper than shouting ever could. No one said a word. No one asked questions. And Marielle, she just watched me go like it was inevitable, like I had finally fulfilled the role they'd written for me the day I joined their family. But let me backtrack for a moment, because none of this happened overnight. When I first met Marielle, I wasn't a man looking to marry into wealth. I had my own small logistics firm, profitable, quiet, nothing flashy. I liked structure. I liked systems. I liked being the man people didn't notice until they needed him. Marielle came into my life like a flash of light, charismatic, confident, magnetic in that way only people born into privilege could be. She didn't fall in love with me because I had power. She fell for me because I didn't seem to want any. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. Her father, Frederick, was different from the rest of them. He didn't care about social clubs or status or who vacationed where. He valued competence. He saw how my firm operated, and he liked what he saw. When he invited me to consult on streamlining Grafton Enterprises' warehousing and transport model, I thought it would be a temporary project. Then came the second invitation, then a full-time offer. Then, over drinks one night, Frederick said something that stayed with me. They underestimate you, Silas. That's not a weakness. It's your strongest weapon. And so I joined. Quietly. No demands. No title negotiations. I let them place me wherever they wanted, operations director, tucked away in the back end of the company. It was perfect. I had eyes on everything and a voice in nothing. I got to see who worked and who postured, who built and who bragged. And oh, there was plenty of the latter. Trent, for example. He was the type who mistook presence for power. Always loud. Always networking. He wore suits that cost more than some employees made in a month, yet couldn't read a balance sheet without help. But Evelyn loved to call him the future of Grafton. Said he had vision. What he really had was ego, and a mother who spoon-fed it to him like honey. Evelyn never trusted me. Not from the beginning. She'd smile at family dinners, pour me wine, laugh at my jokes, but there was something in her eyes. Like she was always calculating whether I belonged. I remember once, at a Grafton charity gala, I overheard her say to one of her friends, Silas is humble. Too humble. That can't be real. She was right, in a way. I wasn't pretending to be humble. I simply didn't need validation. There's a big difference. But people like Evelyn and Trent, they couldn't grasp that. To them, if you weren't bragging, you were hiding. If you weren't loud, you must be weak. That misunderstanding was their first mistake. The second was thinking silence meant surrender. What they didn't know, what they never cared to look into, was who I truly was. Not just Marielle's husband. Not just the quiet ops guy. But a man with stakes. With reach. And, thanks to Frederick, with power they couldn't even imagine. The day Trent fired me, I could have spoken up. I could have mentioned the shares. The legal agreements. The silent contracts Frederick and I had structured with attorneys and board proxies. But I didn't. Because the truth is, sometimes you have to let people show the world exactly who they are before you take the floor. Let them write their story. Then tear out the final page. I sipped my coffee and opened my laptop. My inbox was full, confused suppliers, delayed schedules, even a few overseas partners asking why they hadn't heard from me. I replied to each one calmly, setting brief meetings. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't need to. They'd see it soon enough. Then I opened an older email. One I'd saved for a moment like this. Subject line. Legacy clause confirmation. It was a signed scan from Frederick's personal lawyer, dated 3 years ago, confirming my 40% voting share in Grafton Enterprises. Locked. Transfer protected. Silent until triggered by removal without cause or any hostile executive takeover attempt. Trent had unknowingly pulled that trigger. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how quickly perception shapes reality. All these years, I let them view me as background noise. And I never corrected them. Why would I? It's easy to maneuver in the shadows when everyone else is blinded by their own spotlight. They whispered that I only had a job because Frederick pitted me. They assumed I needed the family, that I needed Marielle. But they never asked why I never brought my own family around. Why I drove a modest car. Why I didn't flex, didn't boast, didn't chase credit. Because the truth? I didn't come into their world empty-handed. I came in playing the long game, and they gave me everything I needed to win it. I walked over to the small cabinet in the corner of the office and pulled out an old photo, one of Frederick and me at a Grafton warehouse site, both of us in construction vests and laughing over some ridiculous inventory glitch. He wasn't just my father-in-law. He was my mentor, the only person in that family who saw past the surface. He once told me, "This company doesn't need another prince. It needs a steward." That's what I'd been all along. While Trent played dress-up CEO and Evelyn plotted in corners, I made sure trucks left on time. That deal's closed. That software system stayed ahead of competitors. I did the work no one clapped for. And now? Now I was going to let them feel what happens when the man they dismissed turns out to be the pillar they were standing on. I turned off the lights in my office and stepped out into the hallway. Quiet. Empty. Clean. It reminded me of something I'd read once. True power is never loud. It is silent, still, and terrifying when revealed. They had seen the outsider. But soon, they would meet the man behind the curtain, and they wouldn't know what hit them. When the news came in, I was already halfway through a morning call with one of our international partners. A short ping on my phone. Nothing flashy, just a private message from Frederick's driver. He's back. Early. Walking into headquarters now. I read it twice. Frederick wasn't supposed to return for another 2 weeks. His surgery had gone well, but the doctors had insisted on rest. 3 weeks minimum. No meetings. No emails. No stress. Clearly, that advice didn't stick. I leaned back in my chair, the corner of my mouth twitching into something between a smirk and a breath of relief. This was it. The moment that would flip the entire game board. I ended my call, locked my screen, and stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my private office, staring out over the city. My reflection looked back at me, calm, still, unreadable. I could already imagine how it was unfolding down there on the 25th floor. Frederick Grafton didn't walk into a room. He arrived. I could picture it perfectly. The double glass doors parting. The slight hush as employees recognized him. The quiet shuffle of people suddenly pretending to be busy, suddenly standing straighter. His cane tapping lightly against the floor, more for rhythm than support. The board meeting had already been scheduled that morning. Trent called it to announce new leadership strategies, his code phrase for grabbing more control. He thought he had the room. He thought his mother's influence would seal it. He had no idea the founder himself was about to walk into that room and break his little spell in half. I didn't go down. I didn't need to. That room was about to catch fire all on its own. Later, when the assistant who once avoided my eyes came running breathlessly into my office to tell me what happened, I just nodded and let her speak. But let me tell it to you the way I saw it in my mind. Because while I wasn't in the room, I know those people too well. Frederick stepped inside, early. No one saw it coming. One moment, Trent was mid-presentation, probably babbling about streamlining executive decisions, and the next, his father's voice cut through the noise like a sword through fog. "Where's Silas?" Just 3 words. That's all it took. Everyone froze. Trent blinked, confused. Dad, you weren't. How did it?" Frederick didn't sit, didn't smile. He just leaned slightly on his cane and repeated, this time with a colder edge, "Where is Silas?" You have to understand, Frederick wasn't a man of drama. But when he raised his voice, even a little, the room listened. Years of respect earned that right. Trent gave the kind of laugh you use when you're caught off guard and trying to play it cool. "Oh, him? Yeah. I let him go. He was only here because you felt sorry for him, remember?" Silence. I imagine it was the kind of silence that settles just before a storm shatters windows. That kind of silence. Frederick's entire expression changed. Not a flicker of surprise. He already knew, of course. But it was the way he let Trent say it out loud, like handing a man a shovel and watching him dig his own grave. "You fired him," Frederick said, voice as calm as ever. Trent, oblivious, still trying to flex. It was overdue. He was dead weight. No authority, no pedigree. You fool, Frederick snapped. The shift was instant. That was the moment the atmosphere in that boardroom fractured. You absolute fool, Frederick repeated, louder now. Didn't you know who he was? The heads of departments glanced around. Nervous glances. Fidgeting hands. Shifting in their chairs. These were people who had worked with me for years but never really looked at me. They heard the whispers from Evelyn, the passive insults from Trent, and they let them shape their judgment. But now? Now they were about to understand what they'd been sitting beside all along. Frederick stepped forward, slow but sure. Silas isn't just your brother-in-law, Trent. He isn't just an employee you can throw out because your mother whispered something in your ear. He paused. Then, in one breath, he dropped the bomb. He owns 40% of this company. Gasps. Real ones. That was the kind of sentence that doesn't land like words. It lands like thunder. Frederick pulled out a file from the leather folio under his arm. Pages rustled. Signatures. Witnesses. Seals. 3 years ago, I transferred those shares to him. Quietly. As a contingency for exactly this kind of nonsense. Not only does he hold equity, he holds voting power. Nearly equal to mine. Trent's face, they told me later, went ghost white. All the color drained. You could hear his breath catch. He stammered something about not knowing and miscommunication, but Frederick wasn't done. I left you in charge for 3 weeks, and in 2 days, you managed to insult the man who keeps your supply chain running, humiliate your brother-in-law, and destabilize trust across several departments. Congratulations. He turned to the board members. Let me be perfectly clear. Silas Grant is not only staying, he is one of us. And from this point forward, his silence should no longer be mistaken for submission. The meeting didn't last much longer after that. Some of them tried to backpedal, muttering support, saying they'd always respected me. I knew the types. Loyalty only when it's safe. I wasn't angry at them. I just didn't need them anymore. Later that day, Trent tried to storm into my office. He didn't make it past the hallway. Security didn't stop him. He stopped himself, stood outside my door, staring at the nameplate he hadn't seen before. S. Grant, Private Executive Office. He realized then that this wasn't new, that I'd been here all along, that this wasn't a comeback story. It was a checkmate. The phone started ringing before the meeting even ended. At first, I ignored it, let it vibrate against my desk while I scrolled through my backlog of messages. But then it rang again, and again. 10 calls in 10 minutes. All from the same number. Trent. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, cradling a mug of dark roast between my hands, and let the silence of my office wrap around me like a second skin. I'd waited years for a moment like this, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. For once, the people who thought they ran the show were finally seeing the truth, and it terrified them. By the time his voicemail inbox hit capacity, I'd already heard enough. Silas, listen, man. Look, I didn't know. Nobody told me. Mom said. Pause. Fumbling breath. I swear if I'd known. I was just trying to protect the company. Please, call me back. We need to fix this. Fix this. As if this were a flat tire or a missed appointment. As if he hadn't humiliated me in front of half the company, slapped me like a dog in a boardroom, and tossed me out like trash. I didn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, I opened my calendar and moved up a few internal review meetings. Frederick and I had agreed it was time to make some surgical corrections, and now the patient was wide open. I buzzed my assistant. Give me the files on all recent departmental hires, especially those made in the last 12 months under Trent's direction. I want performance records, incident reports, disciplinary logs. Everything. Her voice crackled through the speaker. Yes, Mr. Grant. Right away. Mr. Grant. It still made me pause. Not because it was new, but because it felt earned now. Not tolerated. Not begrudged. Earned. Trent called again an hour later. And then again. The second voicemail was even worse. His voice cracked midway. Silas, come on, man. You know how Mom is. She said you were just taking up space, that Dad only kept you around to keep Marielle happy. I didn't mean any of it. I was just trying to do what she wanted. Please. This is all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word rolled around in my head like a loose marble in a glass. Except I hadn't misunderstood anything. They'd underestimated me, disrespected me, and tried to erase me. And now? Now they were scared. But the part that truly struck me wasn't Trent's desperation. It was the sudden, awkward silence from Marielle. Not one text. Not a single knock on my door. Nothing. The woman I had once dreamed of growing old with hadn't even asked if I was okay. Not after the firing. Not after the reveal. Not once. That kind of silence doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from choice. She had made hers, and I had made mine. Later that evening, just before sunset, I stepped out of my office and rode the elevator down to the executive garage. My car was parked in the same spot it had always been, sloppy 12, tucked beside the pillar. But this time, as I approached, something felt different. I turned the corner and found Trent leaning against my car. He looked like hell. Tie loosened, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, but trembling just enough to show the cracks. "Silas," he said, standing up straight. "We need to talk." I looked at him, really looked. Not the pompous little tyrant in designer suits, but the scared boy hiding under all that bluster. "We already talked," I said calmly. "Remember? You said I was here out of pity. You slapped me, had me escorted out like a thief." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "No," I replied. "You didn't bother to know." He looked away, then back. "I made a mistake." "That's not a mistake," I said. "A mistake is printing the wrong number on a sales sheet. What you did was intentional." I panicked, he admitted. "I thought Dad was done. Mom said I had to act fast, take charge, show strength. I didn't think you'd fight back." I almost laughed at that. "Fight back? Trent, I haven't even started." His face paled. "I'm not here to destroy you." I continued. "I don't need to. You've done that on your own. What I will do is rebuild what you try to tear down. And you'll watch it happen." He stood there for a second, shifting on his feet, searching my face for any sign of forgiveness. When he found none, he reached for the last thread he could grab. "What do I do now?" I paused, then stepped closer. "You start by remembering the exact moment you lost your crown and realizing it never belonged to you in the first place." I opened my car door, got in, and drove off without another word. As the city lights blurred past my windshield, I thought about how different things could have been. If Trent had ever bothered to listen. If Evelyn had ever looked beyond her pride. If Marielle had spoken even a single word in my defense. But none of them had. And now? Now they were all in panic mode. And me? I was just getting comfortable. Back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and walked to the quiet corner of the balcony. From up here, the world looked small. Predictable. Like a chessboard I already knew the moves to. My phone buzzed one last time that night. A text. From Trent. "Silas, please. I'll step down. I'll resign. Just don't shut me out completely. Please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Because when someone finally sees your worth after they've tried to erase you, that's not reconciliation. That's fear. And I wasn't going to give fear the satisfaction of a response. It was 3 years ago, but I remember that night like it happened yesterday. Frederick had called me unexpectedly, just after a late board meeting wrapped up. No explanation. Just a short message. "Come to the cellar." I almost laughed when I read it. The cellar? That wasn't a place for business. That was his private sanctuary, where he stored old vintages and family keepsakes, where only his most trusted company ever stepped. I had only been down there once before, briefly, to help him carry a delivery crate from a supplier in Bordeaux. But this time was different. I walked through the house, past the marbled kitchen and down the winding hallway until I reached the heavy oak door. It was already cracked open. I stepped inside and found him seated alone, a dim lamp casting long shadows across the stone floor. "Close the door," he said. His voice was low, calm, but there was something in it that told me this wasn't just about wine or idle reflection. I shut it gently behind me. On the table in front of him sat 2 glasses and a thick brown envelope. No branding, no seal, just a faint crease down the center, as if it had been opened and read many times. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit." I obeyed, not out of obligation, but because when Frederick Grafton said sit, you did. He poured us both a drink. A deep red, one of his favorites. Then he slid the envelope toward me and said, "Read this." All of it. I pulled the contents free and saw legal papers. At first, they looked like stockholder documents, amendments to existing contracts. But as I read further, I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a blueprint. A hidden structure he had built within the very foundation of Grafton Enterprises. A system of protection, of power transfer, that activated only under certain conditions. Legacy clause, the heading read. According to it, Frederick had already transferred 40% of the company's voting shares into a silent trust, one registered under my name. Not public, not visible to general shareholders, not even to Evelyn, Marielle, or Trent. He had done this quietly, deliberately. I looked up at him, stunned. Why? I asked. Why me? Frederick leaned back, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he gave a quiet sigh. Because you remind me of me, he said. Back when I started this company in a warehouse with peeling paint and one fax machine that barely worked. He took a slow sip from his glass. I see the way you move through this family, this business. You don't shout. You don't fight for the spotlight. You just do the work. Smart. Patient. Steady. He paused. They think you're passive, Silas. But I know better. I've watched you fix things quietly that they didn't even know were broken. I didn't know what to say. I had never heard him speak this way before. Not with sentiment. Not with conviction so raw. You could have given this to Trent, I said, honestly. He's your son. Frederick laughed, dry, hollow. Trent is a show pony in a world that needs draft horses. He talks. He preens. He plays politics. But you? You keep things alive. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pen. I need you to sign that last page. The clause isn't valid until you do. I hesitated. Does Evelyn know? He shook his head. And she won't. She'd burn the whole company down to keep control in the family bloodline. She never understood that legacy isn't about blood. It's about stewardship. So I signed. And from that moment on, I became something else, not just an operations guy. Not just the quiet husband of the Grafton daughter. I became the silent spine of a $200 million company. And I carried that weight in silence for 3 long years. I kept my head down. Watched Trent rise, watched Evelyn manipulate meetings, watched Marielle's affection quietly wither into indifference. I said nothing. Not because I was weak, but because Frederick had asked me to wait. Let them show you who they really are, he had said. And they did. Every smirk, every exclusion, every boardroom slight. They thought I was irrelevant. A placeholder. But I was watching, documenting, letting the rope tighten just enough. Because that's the thing about power, when you don't flaunt it, no one suspects you have it. And when the moment finally comes, it doesn't land like a slap. It lands like a thunderclap. That morning when Trent fired me, when he stood there puffed up and smug, claiming I was only there out of pity, I had the clause in my briefcase the whole time. I could have pulled it out right there, dropped it like a grenade and walked out with the building in flames. But I didn't, because this was never about revenge. It was about the truth. The truth Frederick saw in me. The truth they refused to see for themselves. And now, after all the whispers and betrayals, it was finally out. I could hear Frederick's voice in my head again, like a quiet echo in the back of my mind. They'll learn one day. But when they do, make sure they learn everything. And that was the part that stuck with me. Because the legacy clause wasn't just a backup plan. It was a test of patience, a test of character. I had waited 3 years, watching a family unravel itself from the inside. Not with hate, but with arrogance, with ego, with carelessness. And now it was time to rebuild, not in their image, but in mine. Later that night, I pulled the original copy of the legacy clause from my private vault, held it under the light, ran my fingers across the notary seal. Everything Frederick had predicted had come true. The fall of Trent. The implosion of Evelyn's influence. Even the slow decay of Marielle's loyalty. I thought about him, sitting alone in that wine cellar, watching the empire he built tip dangerously toward vanity. And I realized something. He hadn't just given me the shares. He had given me the burden of fixing what he no longer could. And I intended to carry that burden with quiet precision. Because unlike them, I didn't need applause. I just needed results. The air outside the Grafton Enterprises building was crisp that morning. Sunlight spilled across the plaza like someone had tipped a jar of gold over the city. Employees trickled in like every other Monday, coffee in hand, half awake, unaware they were walking into a turning point. The kind that didn't just change headlines, but legacies. Inside the building, everything was already set. The press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp in the main atrium. Invitations had gone out the night before, carefully worded, deliberate. Frederick didn't want any leaks. No whispers ahead of time. No time for Trent or Evelyn to spin their version. This wasn't going to be a meeting. This was going to be a reckoning. I stood off to the side as the media poured in, reporters from every major business outlet, local journalists, even a few foreign correspondents. Grafton Enterprises had that kind of weight. It wasn't just a company, it was a name, a dynasty. And today, that dynasty was about to be rewritten. Frederick walked out right on time. No cane today. He'd refused it, despite his doctor's warnings. Said it made him look fragile. Said today, more than ever, he needed to stand on his own. He stepped up to the mic, calm and firm, his presence alone silencing the murmurs in the room. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, scanning the room. "I'll keep this brief and clear. No greetings. No introductions. Just purpose. There's been a great deal of confusion about recent decisions made during my absence. While recovering from surgery, certain changes were made at the executive level, without my knowledge, and without proper authority." He paused there, letting the implication land. "I've reviewed these actions. I've met with legal counsel. And I've made my decision." He turned slightly, extending a hand toward the side entrance. "Silas Grant, please join me." The room stirred. Cameras snapped. Some gasped. Yes, gasped, like they were seeing a ghost. I walked forward, slow and steady, wearing the same suit they'd once called too plain for upper management. Only this time, every eye followed me. Not out of pity, but out of curiosity, maybe even respect. Frederick continued. "This man is not only a member of my family, but a critical pillar of this company's success. For years, he's worked behind the scenes, quietly maintaining our operations with precision, intelligence, and loyalty." He looked directly into one of the cameras now. Silas was removed from his position without justification. "And I'm here today to correct that mistake, publicly and permanently." He turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, Silas Grant is reinstated at Grafton Enterprises, not just as Director of Operations, but as Co-Chief Executive Officer. The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions over one another. Microphones pushed forward. Flashbulbs went off like lightning. I stood still, my hands folded calmly in front of me, while the world finally saw the man they tried to erase. One voice broke through the noise. "Mr. Grafton, is this true? Does Mr. Grant actually hold significant ownership in the company?" Frederick didn't hesitate. "Yes. He owns 40% of Grafton Enterprises through a private trust one established 3 years ago. His stake is legally binding, irrevocable, and entirely earned." That last part? That was for Trent, and Evelyn, and maybe even Marielle, wherever she was. A second voice asked, "And what of Trent Grafton? Will he retain his position as CEO?" Frederick gave a tight, polite smile. "Trent will be taking an extended leave of absence, effective today." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the slap, the sneer, the way he laughed when he said I was only here out of pity. Pity? Huh? Let's talk about that. Because what they never understood, what they still probably didn't, was that pity doesn't build companies. It doesn't hold late-night meetings with overseas vendors or reroute an entire logistics chain during a snowstorm or streamline a broken inventory system that's been hemorrhaging money for months. I did that. And I did it without asking for applause. Now, finally, I didn't have to. When the press conference ended, I stood beside Frederick as the reporters were escorted out. A few department heads lingered near the back, faces I recognized. Men and women who had worked with me, watched me, and silently judged me for years. One of them, Carlene from Finance, approached with cautious eyes. "Mr. Grant." Silas, I just wanted to say congratulations." I gave her a small nod. "Thank you, Carlene." She hesitated, then added, "We should have seen it earlier." I smiled, not unkindly. Most people don't look for what they don't expect to find. She blinked, then nodded, understanding. Back in my office, the congratulations continued. Some emails, some messages, some in-person gestures that felt awkward but sincere. People weren't sure how to treat me now. I wasn't the background man anymore. I wasn't just Marielle's husband or the ops guy who never spoke up. I was co-CEO, and they were learning how to adjust. But not everyone adjusted with grace. Evelyn didn't show her face that day. Neither did Trent. And Marielle? Not a call. Not a message. Not even a comment in the family group chat, which had now gone dead silent. I wasn't surprised. I think, deep down, she was more embarrassed by how it happened than what happened. Because I didn't just rise. I was lifted, by facts, by merit, by Frederick himself. And that sort of truth is hard to swallow when you've spent years convincing yourself you married down. That night, I sat in my living room, the co-CEO announcement still trending online. Business blogs dissected the decision. Some praised it as visionary. Others speculated about a power shift in the Grafton family. Some even called it a revenge story. They were wrong. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. I poured a drink, turned the phone face down, and allowed myself a moment I hadn't felt in years, peace. Because I didn't shout to be heard. I didn't fight to be seen. I just waited and showed up when it mattered most. Retribution didn't come with fists or fire. It came with a spreadsheet, a plan, and a closed-door meeting at 7 a.m. the Monday after my reinstatement, where the only thing louder than the ticking wall clock was the silence from those who used to dismiss me. I had called in every department head, finance, legal, HR, tech, logistics, you name it. Some came curious. Some came nervous. A few, like Dawn from marketing, walked in with smug skepticism, still thinking this was some temporary stunt orchestrated by Frederick. They didn't know I'd been watching for years. Every hire, every expense, every shortcut disguised as innovation. So when I stood at the head of the conference table and turned on the projector, I didn't start with small talk. I opened with a single slide. This ends now. There was no yelling, no theatrics. I didn't need them. I had facts, receipts, a compiled list of mismanaged accounts, underqualified hires, botched contracts, and cushy deals handed to friends of Trent or Evelyn. I had proof of nepotism so blatant it might as well have been printed on company letterhead. As I went line by line, I watched the realization dawn on their faces. This wasn't a figurehead promotion. This was a reckoning. And I wasn't there to get even. I was there to clean house. I'm not here to fire everyone who disagreed with me, I said, after laying it all bare. But I will remove anyone who mistook this company for their personal playground. A few heads lowered. I believe in accountability. I believe in clarity. And I believe in second chances for those who actually work. I paused. But make no mistake, those chances are limited. The message landed. By the end of that week, 3 of Trent's personal hires were gone, fired quietly, with severance packages I approved but didn't soften. Evelyn's favored HR director was reassigned to a branch in Nevada, far from the influence she used to wield, with a smirk and a whispered suggestion. And Trent? Oh, he stayed for now. Reassigned, not as an executive, but as a senior analyst in data strategy. A role he once joked was for clipboard guys with no ambition. Now he was one of them, answering to a department manager half his age, working on a team that didn't care about last names. Some called it cruel. I called it symmetry. Because this wasn't just revenge. This was reform. I didn't dismantle Grafton Enterprises. I recalibrated it. I began installing quarterly transparency reports, revamped the hiring process to use blind resumes, reopened vendor contracts to assess fairness and pricing. I promoted mid-level managers who had been overlooked for years, quiet, hard-working people like Tanya from procurement or Leo from IT, whose innovation had been repeatedly ignored because he wasn't Grafton material. They were stunned when I called them into my office, handed them new contracts, and said, "Your work hasn't gone unnoticed. It just hasn't been seen by the right eyes until now." I remember Tanya choking up, her voice trembling. I thought, people like me didn't get seen here. You do now, I told her. I made sure of it. The change wasn't instant. You can't turn a ship this big in one day. But within weeks, the mood shifted. People stopped walking on eggshells. They started sharing ideas again. Performance improved across the board. And slowly, the whispers stopped being about how I came into power and started being about what I was doing with it. One afternoon, after a particularly productive product launch meeting, I walked through the operations floor, the same floor I used to quietly oversee while people spoke over me. Now, voices lowered respectfully when I passed. Not out of fear, but out of earned presence. I paused by Trent's new desk. He didn't look up at first, just kept his eyes glued to his monitor, typing something stiffly. When he finally noticed me, he straightened. "Silas," he said with a slight nod. "How's the new team treating you?" I asked. "They're professional," he muttered. "Good," I said. "You might learn something." He winced, but didn't argue. That, at least, was new. I didn't linger. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing through a hallway where my name had once been a joke and was now etched in. For the name Grafton, which had been tarnished by ego and entitlement. One afternoon, Frederick called me into his home. He was sitting in his study, fireplace lit, glass of scotch in hand. "I've been watching," he said. I sat across from him, waiting. "You didn't burn it down. You rebuilt it." "I did what you asked," I replied. He nodded slowly. "No, you did more." He reached into his drawer and slid an envelope toward me. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a draft amendment. He was transferring another 10% of the company into my hands. No strings. Full control. You've proven who this company belongs to, he said. Now I'm making it official. I didn't speak right away. Because for a man like me, someone who had been mocked, slapped, discarded, this wasn't just a gesture. It was a confirmation. I stood, shook his hand, and thanked him. Not just for the trust, but for giving me the chance to earn it when no one else did. That night, I walked home instead of driving. The streets felt quieter, cleaner, like the chaos had settled. The wind was sharp, but it felt good, like something was being stripped away, leaving only what mattered. I passed by the old Grafton billboards downtown. For years, those signs showed Trent's grinning face or Evelyn's elegant branding slogans. Now, they displayed the company's new vision statement. Earned, not entitled. A message I'd written myself. And beneath it? Just the Grafton logo. No faces. No last names. Because real leadership doesn't advertise. It leads. It's strange how you can share a house with someone and still feel like a guest. After the press conference, after the restructuring, after the congratulatory handshakes and subtle nods from board members who used to look past me, Marielle said nothing. She was already home that evening when I arrived, standing by the kitchen island with a glass of wine and her phone, scrolling as if the day's events hadn't just turned her entire family's dynamic upside down. She didn't look up, didn't ask where I'd been, didn't say congratulations. Nothing. I walked in, loosened my tie, set my briefcase down, and waited for her to acknowledge me. She didn't. So I poured a glass of water and stood opposite her, letting the silence stretch. You heard, I finally said. She nodded without looking up. It was on every news channel. I'd have to be deaf not to. Another pause. And I asked. She glanced at me now, her eyes cool and unreadable. You really played us, didn't you? There it was. Not a question of concern. Not curiosity. Just accusation. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. I didn't play anyone. I protected what your family was willing to destroy. Her laugh was soft, almost bitter. Is that how you're spinning it now? The silent hero? The patient genius hiding in plain sight? I didn't hide, I said. You just never bothered to see. She set her glass down harder than necessary, the clink sharp against the marble. You could have told me. You could have told me, Silas. I tried, I replied. But every time I started, you either changed the subject or rolled your eyes. You wanted a version of me you could manage. Something safe, predictable, forgettable. Her eyes narrowed. You're twisting this. No, I said calmly. I'm finally untwisting it. She shook her head, walking toward the sink and turning her back to me. So what now? You're the king of the castle? Everyone bows to Silas? Even Trent, demoted and leashed? This isn't about crowns, I said. It's about responsibility. She stared out the window. It's about revenge. No. If it were, you'd be out of this house already. She turned then, finally facing me with something real in her eyes. Whether it was fear or guilt, I couldn't say. I didn't know what they were planning, she said quietly. I nodded. But you didn't stop them either. The words hung there, heavier than I expected. I didn't think it mattered, she admitted. You were always just there. Reliable. Quiet. I never thought you were. Capable. I offered. Worthy? Important. Dangerous, she said. That surprised me. You scare them now, she added. You scare me a little. That cut deeper than anything else she could have said. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I'd changed. Maybe not in my core, but in the way I moved. The way I was seen. And the man she married. The one who folded laundry on Sundays, fixed dripping faucets, smiled through dinner with her parents even while they belittled him. He wasn't standing in front of her anymore. He was gone. Replaced with someone who no longer bowed, no longer explained himself, no longer waited for validation that would never come. I walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, letting the tension settle. A few moments later, she followed and stood behind me, arms crossed. Why didn't you leave? She asked softly. After everything they did. After I didn't say anything. Why stay? I stared ahead at the muted TV screen, some documentary playing, irrelevant. Because I loved you, I said. Past tense. The silence after that was different. She sank into the chair opposite me, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you still? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the first time we met. How alive she was. How she made me feel like I belonged in rooms I never dared to enter before. I thought about the wedding, the vows, The way she squeezed my hand when we talked about starting a family. The woman who once looked at me like I was her whole world. But then I thought about the look on her face when Trent fired me. Blank. Cold. Distant. Like I wasn't worth defending. Like I was disposable. I met her eyes now, and I spoke with honesty, not cruelty. I don't know. She nodded slowly, like she had expected it, but hoped to hear something else. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she said. But you did, I replied. Not with what you said, but with what you didn't. She wiped her eye quickly. The kind of motion someone makes when they don't want to cry in front of the person they failed. So what now, she asked. I keep doing what I was meant to do, I said. Lead. Rebuild. Be the man your father trusted me to be. And me? I exhaled through my nose, my voice steady but distant. That's up to you. We didn't talk the rest of the night. She went to bed before I did, and I stayed downstairs, reading a report on internal restructuring proposals. But not a single word on the page really sank in. All I kept thinking about was how love doesn't always leave with a door slam or a screaming match. Sometimes, it dies in the quiet. In the moment your wife watches you get dragged out of your job and says nothing. In the pause after success, where the person who's supposed to be proud of you just resents you for standing taller than they expected. Marielle and I lived under the same roof for the next few weeks, but something had broken beyond repair. We ate separately, slept on opposite sides of the house. We became polite strangers with too much history and too little heart left. She never asked about the company. I never brought it up. Then one morning, I walked into the kitchen and found a note on the counter. I've gone to stay with my sister for a while. I think we both need time. No signature. No kiss. No I love you. Just silence. Again. But this time, it didn't hurt. It felt honest. Because some betrayals don't come with screaming or slamming doors. They come with silence. And sometimes, silence is louder than anything else. Evelyn Grafton never begged. At least, not in any way most people would recognize. Her brand of power was polished and quiet, trimmed in pearls and practiced smiles. She didn't scream to get her way. She whispered. She aligned. She controlled from behind the curtain, making others believe her decisions were their own. But the thing about puppeteers is, once the strings snap, they're just people with no hands left to move the show. It started with a board meeting she called herself, an emergency session meant to realign vision. I received the calendar invite on a Tuesday evening. No agenda, no prep, no mention of Frederick. She still thought she had influence. She still didn't get it. The morning of the meeting, I arrived 10 minutes early and took my seat at the head of the table. Frederick wasn't there, by design. We'd already talked. He said it was time to let her try and fail in front of everyone. Let her be seen. The boardroom filled slowly. A few of the senior members whispered to one another. Evelyn entered last, wearing one of her signature white suits, pearls glinting, her heels clicking like an old judge entering court. She nodded to a few allies, former allies, rather, then turned to me with a smile so tight it might as well have been carved into her face. Shall we begin? She asked. I nodded. By all means. She stood at the front of the room, holding a tablet she didn't even glance at. There has been a great deal of disruption over the past few weeks, she began. While I respect the decisions made in my husband's absence, I believe they were emotionally driven, and perhaps misinformed. There it was, the start of her campaign. Smooth, elegant, insidious. I propose we revisit the current executive structure, she continued. Reevaluate the new appointments, and realign leadership toward experience and legacy rather than reaction. That word, legacy, she liked to use it as a weapon, as a crown, as if it belonged solely to bloodlines and birthday dinners. She paused, as if expecting a nod, a ripple of support. None came, so she pressed on. Furthermore, I'd like to nominate an interim executive advisory board, comprised of key family stakeholders, until things stabilize. I looked around the room, watching faces carefully. A few looked confused, others uncomfortable. Finally, I spoke. Are you suggesting a family-controlled committee override the board? I'm suggesting we return balance, she replied, still smiling. It's not personal, Silas. That was when I opened my folder and slid a document across the table toward the board secretary. This is a copy of the HR investigation your office buried 3 months ago, I said calmly. She blinked. Excuse me. It outlines how your interim hires under Trent falsified credentials, bypassed compliance screenings, and inflated operational numbers for a projected quarterly report you submitted to stakeholders. A hush fell over the room. Those errors were caught by Tanya Dorsey and Leo Barron, 2 employees you attempted to terminate under the justification of department redundancy. Luckily, your requests were flagged. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her tablet. I wasn't done. Second, I said, sliding a second folder to the legal counsel on my left. This includes email chains showing your direct interference in executive hiring decisions while Frederick was under medical care. That violates 3 clauses in the company charter and could be grounds for removal. Now there were murmurs. Real ones. One of the more senior board members leaned forward. Is this accurate? It's verified, I said. Frederick co-signed the documentation. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came out. I stood slowly, not with anger, with finality. You didn't protect the company, Evelyn. You protected your son. And in doing so, you jeopardized contracts, misused HR authority, and nearly tanked our expansion deal in Jakarta. She blinked rapidly now. The carefully composed woman was cracking, right there in front of people who had once followed her every word. I have spent the last 5 years fixing what you ignored, I said, louder now. And when I did it quietly, you called it luck. You called it pity. But let me make one thing clear. This company was never built on pity. It was built on precision. She turned to the others. This is an ambush. He's twisting facts. No, a voice interrupted. It was Carlene, from finance. He's telling the truth. Another voice chimed in. I reviewed the Jakarta fallout. He saved the deal. And another. My department was never consulted about those new hires. I didn't even know who they were reporting to. Evelyn turned pale. One by one, the board members aligned, not with me, but with truth. With merit. It wasn't personal. It was earned. When it was over, I didn't gloat. I didn't speak again. I let the board make their move. A vote was called. Unanimous. Evelyn Grafton was removed from all executive capacities, and her voting shares suspended pending legal arbitration. Frederick had signed off on it already. She stood there for a long moment, not moving, just breathing, like someone trying to wake up from a dream they couldn't believe had turned into a nightmare. Then, with dignity unraveling thread by thread, she gathered her things and walked out. No goodbyes. No farewell speech. Just silence. Later that day, Frederick and I met in his study. He didn't say much. Just sat with a scotch and nodded slowly. She always thought the company was her inheritance, he said. But it was never about blood. It was about who could carry it forward. She still thinks I stole it, I replied. She knows better now. That night, I sat alone on the back porch of our house, though it felt emptier by the day. I looked up at the stars and let the cold night wind brush against my face. Trent had transferred to the Ohio branch without protest. No goodbye. No fight. Just a quiet exit. Evelyn hadn't spoken to Frederick since the vote. She'd hired a lawyer, of course, but we weren't worried. The evidence was airtight. Marielle was still at her sister's. She hadn't contacted me, and I didn't chase her. Because the truth is, when people show you what they value, believe them. They valued control, status, illusion. And I valued something else. A company with integrity. A legacy worth defending. A future not built on entitlement, but on effort. Evelyn once ruled this family like a matriarch out of marble and gold. But marble cracks. Gold fades. And power, real power, doesn't shout. It rebuilds quietly. One policy at a time. One truth at a time. One removal at a time. A year passed. 1 full year since Trent fired me with a smirk. Since Evelyn tried to reclaim the company through whispers and manipulation. Since Marielle walked out of our home with a bag, a note, and nothing else. I lived differently now. Mornings were slower. I woke before the sun, brewed my own coffee, and walked to work most days instead of driving. Not because I had to, but because I liked to watch the city wake up. The streets, the lights, the rhythm of life. It reminded me of how far I'd come, of how far they had tried to bury me, and how quietly I had risen back to the top. But now that I was here, I didn't feel taller, just steadier. I had made Grafton Enterprises stronger than it had ever been. The chaos had burned away, leaving only what mattered. The executive structure was leaner, fairer. Promotions were based on metrics, not last names. Bonuses were tied to team success, not wine-glass alliances at board dinners. For the first time in its long and complicated history, the company felt clean. And yet, I didn't gloat. That's the thing about real leadership, it's quiet. It's not about parading titles or forcing people to acknowledge your power. It's about the slow, deliberate work of setting things right and letting the results speak for you. One afternoon, I stood by the tall glass window of my corner office, watching the rain blur the skyline. An intern knocked once, then stepped in with cautious energy. "Mr. Grant," she asked, "you've got the advisory session in 15 minutes. I nodded, but her eyes lingered. She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" I turned. "Of course." She stepped in a little closer. "How did you do it? I mean, how did you go from being fired to owning the place?" Her question wasn't sarcastic. It was curious, admiring, even. I smiled. "I let them believe I didn't belong," I said. "And by the time they realized they were wrong, it was too late to stop me." She blinked, then grinned. "That's kind of awesome." I nodded. "Just remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes it means you're working on something bigger than anyone else can see." She left after that, and I sat back in my chair, thinking. It still surprised me sometimes, how everything changed without a single dramatic outburst on my part. No public meltdown. No furious counterattack. Just time. Patience. Structure. Trent had been officially relocated to the Ohio branch. His email signature now read, Regional Strategic Analyst. A role he barely qualified for before, but one he was finally starting to take seriously. From what I heard, he showed up on time now. Read reports. Ask questions. Maybe losing everything humbled him. Maybe not. Either way, he was no longer my problem. Evelyn never returned to Grafton's headquarters. She lost her influence, her board seat, and most of her inner circle. The lawyers tried their best, but the case never made it to court. Too many documents. Too much evidence. In the end, she settled privately with Frederick and faded from the company's history like a shadow retreating from the light. As for Marielle, she came back once. 3 months after she left, I opened the door to find her standing there with a look I hadn't seen in years. Not pride, not arrogance, just sadness. "I didn't know who you really were," she whispered. I didn't respond. She looked down. "And now I don't know if I ever deserved you." There was nothing to say. We signed the divorce papers 2 weeks later. No drama, no tears, just signatures and silence. The same silence that had filled our house long before anything ever fell apart. Sometimes, love doesn't die loudly. It just disappears without saying goodbye. But this chapter isn't about loss. It's about presence. About what's left when the noise fades. I found purpose in the aftermath. I started a mentorship program within the company for employees who had been overlooked for too long. Men and women who reminded me of who I used to be. Quiet, diligent, never invited to speak at meetings, always expected to nod and move aside. I sat in on their first session, listening more than speaking. And when one of them, a young man named Kamal, asked me how to get people to notice his work, I told him the truth. "You don't chase their attention," I said. "You chase excellence. They'll find you when they need you, and by then, you'll be ready." He nodded like he understood. I hoped he did. One of the greatest misconceptions in business, and in life, is that loud means powerful. That to lead, you must shout. That to win, you must crush. But I built everything by doing the opposite. I listened. I waited. I learned. I didn't slam doors. I opened them from the inside. I didn't demand a crown. I earned it in silence. And that's why, when people now walk into our headquarters and see my name etched beside Frederick's on the glass plaque, they don't ask why. They just nod. Because by now, the story is legend. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I still think about that moment in the boardroom. The day Frederick returned and asked, "Where's Silas?" The pause, the panic, the silence that followed when he revealed who I really was. That moment didn't just expose the truth. It introduced me to myself. I wasn't just the man they underestimated. I was the man they never saw coming. And in the end, that's what makes it all so satisfying. Not the applause, not the title, not the corner office, but the fact that I didn't have to raise my voice to win. I just had to stand still and let the truth speak for him.